Hello and welcome to the Nauticast podcast, the one true chapter by chapter podcast going through A Song of Ice and Fire one chapter a week. I'm one of your hosts, Jeff, better known as Brenda Beefish.
And I'm your other host, Emmett, better known as Poor Quentin.
And welcome to the 125th episode of the Nauticast titled The Third Wish Part 2, an analysis of A Clash of Kings Arya IX, in which Arya has to say goodbye to her magical mentor, Jaqen H'ghar, but at least he helps her turn Harrenhal over to some good, fat, old-fashioned Northmen before he leaves, right? That's a good thing, right? Right?
We'll see how that turns out in Arya 10. I'm going to say the visions and the flames are unclear for now. It's the best I can do.
It's unclear being the optimal word.
And please welcome back to the Nauticast. He was with us for the first half of A Clash of Kings Arya 9, and he's back with us for the second half. WolfmanZack, thanks so much for coming back, buddy.
Yeah, thanks again for having me. It's fun going through this stuff with you guys and unpacking it and seeing how it all shakes out and what you guys say that gets my mind moving. So ready to take it on home.
Yes, and we have your mustaches back as well, and it's bushy glory. So that's what I'm most excited about looking at the entire night is that bushy mustache all night long.
Oh yeah, buddy.
Agreed. Couldn't agree more.
And as always, this episode is brought to you by our not a small council, our Hand of the King, WolfmanZack, who is that? Grand Maester Timbob, troubleshooter of systems and designer of circuit boards. Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Mark N. Lord Travis, master of ships and War of the Waves. Captain of the war galley, Nightwolf, the ship that stalks the seven seas, and wielder of the Valyrian steel trident Summoner, the blade that brings the deep ones. Sir Keith J., Master of Whispers. Lord Philip the Merciful, Master of Laws. Archmaester Joom, Healer of the Lesser Poxes, Ragged Michael, Ward of the North, Nelson the Hammer, Prince of Dragonscone, Scarlet, the Other Woman and Mistress of Whispers, Lord Micah, the Quilled Lion, Ward of the West, Herald of the Golden Tooth, Master of the Banefort, and the Kraken's Bane, Lord James, the Gem that was promised, the High Bearded Priest, Lord Jake Assistant to the Hand of the King, Lady Zeta Valyrian, Sir Jack, Lord of Sir Arthur Dane, and Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, Sad Prophecy Boys Club, His Grace's High Inquisitor, Sir Frank B., Sir Jasper the Cruel, the King's Justice, Lawrence, Prince of Dorne, Kelly, Warden of the Eastern Mistress of Old Bay of Crabs, Steve the Steadfast, Master of Hounds, the Blue Winter Rose, Knight of Highgarden, Lady Stephanie, Lord Anonymous, Lord Carlos, Lord Andrew the Restless, the Priest of the Drowned God, the King's Cook, Noli Oli, Master of Cannoli, Sir Sorcedelica, Prince Matthew of House Targaryen, Proud Soyboy of Summerhall, Defender of the Fifth Book, and Swing Dancer with Dragons, Low Energy Dent, True Master of the Banefort, and True Master of Coin, Lord Penchant for Nostalgia, Queer Alex, Rainbow Commander of the Ladies and Gentle Dems, Lord Quint Esquire, Master of Absolutely Positively Not Serving as a Spy for several unnamed High Lords and Ladies in order to further the secret Blackfire style conspiracy to overthrow the oppressive Small Council. Haldover, the Voyager for T-Wow, A.A. Braun, Dampere, Prophet of the Forsaken, and High Priest of Euron Crozai, Lieutenant Glenn, Lord of H-Town, Veneris of House Colgarian, the first of her name, Princess of Dragonstone, Mistress of Art, the Overwork, Queen of the Pencils, the Eraser in the first draft, Queen of Monochrome, Devotee, the Great Game of Thrones, Portress of the Realm, Lady Realist of the Seven Kingdoms, Blender of Paints, and Maker of Drawings, Lord Adam T., Lady Alexander of Tarth, Sir Christoph Logus, Bloody Scorpion of the Redfield, Defender of the Letter of Kin, and the Wolverine of House Corgoyle, Lady Elizabeth, Mistress of Horse, Face, Lesbians, Sir Josh Snow, Bastard Bounty Hunter of the North, Surveyor, Chief of Parties in the Frozen Wastes, Lord Peter, Lady Ashley, the Dead Shepherd Reborn, Preacher of the Poor Fellows, Marshall, Harrison, Absent, Shipwrecked in the Jade Sea, Grave, Rob Stark, the Cadaver King, and Horror of Harrenhal, Olaf, proponent of establishing a feudal pseudo-democratic system of great councils wherein every count votes, Sir Tim, the Knight who is guided by voices, Lord Nick, Thucydides, Lord of Plagues, Sir Jack, Lord of Sir Arthur Dane and Prince Rhaegar Targaryen, Sad Prophecy Boys Club, Lord Jean the Splendid, Master of Coin, Ward of Tampa Bay, Lady Anna, the Lovely Castellan, Pat Ironwood, the Blood Royal and Guardian of the Boneway, Lord Charles Tyrell of Highgarden, Lord Paramount of the Mander, Defender of the Marches, High Marshal of the Reach, Warden of the South, and the Heir of House Tyrell, Luke, Lord of Lone Leaf and the Pillar of Autumn, Squid Pro Quo, Master of Zorus, and our newest member of the Small Council. Everyone give a warm welcome to Joe Snow, King of the Metro North and Protector of the Tri-State, who has promoted himself or been promoted from High Lordship to the Small Council. Thank you to all of our counselors, and welcome to Joe Snow.
Thank you to all our counselors as always, and thank you especially to Joe Snow. Thank you so much for moving on up. We're glad to have you.
Absolutely. And our spoiler wing, as we say in every episode, will potentially be talking about all published books. That is the 5 novels, 3 Duncan novellas, histories, interviews, the Winds of Winter sample chapters, as well as Game of Thrones TV show. Anything and everything.
Our question this week comes from our aforementioned new small council member, Joe Snow, who asks, "Hey fellas, so excited for your work on Clash to continue. I've been getting back into the Duncan Egg novellas between all this extra free time during the quarantine, which has inevitably led me to reflect and get sad about Summerhall. The image and thoughts of Dunk looking on in horror as he realizes what his lifelong friend is about to unleash, dragons, can't leave my mind and imagination. If you could be given the choice, choose a chapter from George about a POV of Dunk during Summerhall or get another Winds sample chapter. I personally would lean towards that Dunk chapter. Keep up the great work, guys." So what do you think about that, Jeff? That's a fun little choice. Do you want another Winds sample chapter, or would you like to get to the big reveal of Summerhall? Would George just say screw it and jump ahead a few Duncan Egg books and just give us that chapter?
So I have to be the realist in here and say that the Summerhall, yeah, I know, right? I know. Take it back into reality, but the Summerhall chapter, as far as we know, at least from the Duncan Egg novella, which will likely incorporate that, which will be the final Duncan Egg novella, has not been written as far as I know. I know that George has titles for all of the Duncan Egg novellas. I know that he did write a number of a bit of information from that would likely be contained and be expanded upon in that final Duncan Egg novella back in for the World of Ice and Fire. But that chapter isn't written. The last thing we know about George's writing of Duncan Egg is that he had part of what was then known as the She-Wolves of Winterfell, the She-Wolves of Winterfell that was written in around 2013, but he ends up abandoning it and ends up replacing it for the anthology series that he was doing in favor of doing The Princess and the Queen, which of course is a very good series. Nice face, Zach. So I think I would go with the more realistic choice of the Winds sample chapter than that chapter itself. I mean, in a perfect scenario, I think I would probably, yeah, sure, I'd take the POV of Dunk during Summerhall, but I think we talked about this, I feel like over a year ago now, about how we're just not sure how George is actually going to finish the Duncan Egg series at this point, right? I mean, how is he supposed to do that? And the Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring, and he's got a dozen more Duncan Egg novellas he's going to write. Where's he going to find the time to get that? I mean, God willing, George lives to 150 years old, but there is sand going through an hourglass. I'll just put it that way. And there's a lot of stuff to get done in that limited amount of time, and that goes for everyone. So everyone, get your shit done. That's all I have to say about that. What do you think, sir?
Yeah, I mean, part of me thinks just in a brutal way, give us the Dunk chapter and then be done with Duncan Egg. Much as I do love those stories, I just think it's an unrealistic side project to build us to that climax organically at this point. And I get why that feels bitter, because the climax to A Song of Ice and Fire has also had the rug to a certain degree pulled out from underneath it by the show. So it's there's really, what part of this vast universe he's created does the catharsis and the payoff belong to him anymore? None of it. That's got to be a bad feeling.
Brienne goes on some kind of hallucinatory adventure, and she gets the kind of vision flashback into Dunk's POV and sees it all through his eyes, through some, shade of the evening type situation.
Brienne gets her own Weirwood vision dream, like Jaime does in Storm. That works for me. Whatever way you got to shoehorn it in. But no, I've said before, I just part of me wants George to just pack it in and deliver the Winds of Winter like Dickensian, just release it like a chapter a month. Just just give it to us purely. And because, give up you're never going to make it fit into a novel. Your story's too big at this point. Just give us a new sample chapter every month. At this point, part of me would just embrace that.
Yeah, I like that idea, and I know that folks who are very even more connected than I am to George's writing process, Adam Wordhead has talked about how oh, that sounds like a great idea, except for he always goes back and he's writing a chapter, then he'll want to go back, he'll be writing 50 chapters down the way, and he'll have to rewrite the original chapter because I'm like, okay, I get that, but at this point, the story needs to have some sort of conclusion and sort of wrapping up, and I think a weekly installment of Winds of Winter chapters would be great, but what
would be your preference, Zach?
I haven't actually gone into the Duncan Egg novellas myself, so I would say bring on the Winds of Winter. The more the merrier.
Who would you want at this point from Winds if you got a chapter? One of the
Man,
Jamie Brienne.
yeah, I mean that's that whole kind of cliffhanger that that there leads to a lot of speculation, right? And we saw some version of their relationship in the show, but I think it's something that takes us back to Lady Stoneheart and that whole thread. That's what I want, man, all day.
Right on. Well, so thank you so much to Joe Snow for the question. If you'd like to ask us questions here in the Nauticast podcast, you're welcome to become a Sworn Sword or higher level patron over at patreon.com/NautiCastASOIAF, where you can get show notes, access to the Nauta Slack at our 2 highest tiers, monthly Fever Dream chapter by chapter episodes, which have been going really great lately, and a monthly A Song of Ice and Fire /pop culture episodes like part 4 of The Second Coming, our analysis of the Winds of Winter chapter of The Forsaken, which is out for all Poor Fellow and above patrons, and we'll have the conclusion, part 5 of our analysis of The Forsaken, coming next month.
Yes, I'm very excited for doing that. We get to talk about Old Town, Euron, Dampere. Of course, Dampere is going to make it, right? No.
I'm so excited for that stuff. You guys are killing it. It's an awesome series. I'm ready for you guys to bring that one home. And the Fever Dream stuff too, man. I haven't even read the books, and following along has just been awesome. Nice little bonus. So appreciate that you guys are doing that for us.
Well, thanks, brother. I appreciate that.
Zach, you're the best.
Yeah, we're coming to a real.
Best.
Please read Fever Dream, but I mean, we are coming up to one of the most amazing chapters in Fever Dream. There's the next two are just some of two of my favorite chapters. In fact, I think they're definitely my favorite chapters in the book. So it's a lot of fun. So read Fever Dream and come join us for our month by month Fever Dream chapter by chapter analysis. And one last thing about Patreon. So if you're watching live right now, tomorrow morning, or if you're listening on the release day, go back a week and listen to this. We have a special announcement for everyone. We are at long last revealing the designs that our friend Mallory, aka Sandrixian, did for us for t-shirts and other merchandise in our September update posts. So these designs we'll release them. You'll get to take a look at them tomorrow on Patreon. And then there will be a series there'll be a voting post on September 8th, which is the day after the release day of this episode. And voting will be open for 1 week, where you'll get to vote on the winning design. The winning design will then be colorized, finalized. That's what I'm looking for. And our Sworn Sword and higher patrons will receive their free t-shirt with the design on it. There will also apparently be additional merchandise opportunities and things like that for you guys as well. So I hope you take a look at that. And thank you so much for your patience, as I was talking about a few weeks ago. And thank you so much to Mallory for doing these designs. They're really, really cool. I'm very excited. We're both very excited to share these with everyone. But enough about Patreon. When we last checked in with Arya, she had bantered with Hot Pie and Gendry, watched the Bloody Mummers return to Harrenhal with Northern prisoners, and gave Jaqen H'ghar the third name, his own. Let's find out what happens after that in this synopsis of A Clash of Kings, Arya IX, Part 2. Though it's still morning, Harrenhal stirs with Vargo Hoat's arrival. Arya sees the bear cage suspended from a span on a bridge. A couple of boys throw stones at the bear in his cage, while others sing a strange-sounding song. Arya realizes that everyone is eating and drinking before they pass out, and she fears that Pink Eye would wonder where she is. The hungry gods will feast on blood tonight if a man would do this thing, Jaqen said. Sweet girl, kind and gentle, unsay one name and say another, and cast this mad dream aside. I won't. Just so. He seemed resigned. The thing will be done, but a girl must obey. A man has no time for talk. A girl will obey, Arya said. What should I do? Well, Arya is to get some hot broth from the kitchens, and then Jaqen will come and get her. So Arya rolls out and finds Hot Pie in the kitchens, working on loaves of bread, while the rest of the kitchen staff works on a meal for the brave companions. The head chef asks what Weasel wants, and she says that my lord wants broth. The cook thinks she means Vargo Hoat, and he says, no, I'd rather piss in a bowl than serve him. So he orders her to leave, but she says that she has to stay until the soup is complete. So the cook tells her to go help Paya with the butter and cheese. So Arya runs over to Paya, who is mid-coitus with a bloody mummer, but Paya gets dressed in mixed butter and cheese. Paya asks for help, but Arya says, she needs to get to work, or Vargo Hoat will chop off Paya's feet. Yikes, Arya! And then she darts off before Paya can grab her. On the way back, she wondered why none of the captains had their hands or feet chopped off. Maybe Vargo Hoat was afraid to make Robb angry, though he didn't seem the sort to be afraid of anyone. Hot Pie was stirring the kettles with a long wooden spoon when Arya returned to the kitchens. She grabbed up a second spoon and started to help. For a moment, she thought maybe she should tell him, but then she remembered the village and decided not to. He'd only yield again. It was only then that Arya hears Rorge's voice. She turns and sees Rorge with Jaqen and Biter following behind. Rorge demands to take the soup to Arya's dismay. The cook says the soup isn't up yet, but Rorge needs it now, or he'll shove the spit up the cook's ass and put him into the soup. Biter grabs a handful of cooking rabbit to eat, showing his teeth to the cook. So the cook relents, and Jaqen H'ghar puts on a pair of gloves. He hands another pair of oven mitts to Arya, instructing her to help. Then they head up to the widow's tower. A guard there asks what the pot is, and Rorge tells him it's a pot of boiling piss, while Jaqen says the prisoners need to eat as well. When the guard keeps pressing the matter, Arya tells him that it's for the prisoners, not them. So they get waved through. Once inside, Jaqen tells Arya to stay out of the way as they enter. There, they find 8 guards with captives in the dark behind them. The guard calls out to Rorge, calling him an ugly serving wench and asking what's in the kettle. And the boys banner back, it's their cock and balls. The guards crowd around the food, asking if there's onions in it. Finally, one guard says they need bowls and spoons. No, you don't. Which was a terrible Rorge voice. No, you don't. Rorge heaved the scalding hot broth across the face, full in their faces. Jaqen H'ghar did the same. Biter threw his kettles too, swinging them underarms so they spun across the dungeon, raining soup. One caught the captain in the temple as he tried to rise. He went down like a sack of sand and lay still. The rest were screaming in agony, praying or trying to crawl off. Arya pressed back against the wall as Rorge began to cut throats. Biter preferred to grab the men behind the head and under the chin and crack their necks with a single twist of his huge, pale hands. Horrifying. Only one of the guards managed to get a blade out. Jaqen danced away from the slash, drew his own sword, drove the man back into a corner with a flurry of blows, and killed him with a thrust to the heart. The Lorathi brought the blade to Arya, still red with heart's blood, and wiped it clean on the front of her shift. A girl should be bloody too. This is her work. Rorge grabs the key from the hook off the wall and unlocks the cage. The first one to pop out is Green Beret Robot Glover, who introduces himself as Robot Glover. Jaqen bows and calls him my lord. Meanwhile, the other captives strip the guards of weapons and armor, and Arya notices that the men don't look so wounded as they did before. This of the soup. That was clever, the man Glover was saying. I did not expect that. Was it Lord Hote's idea? Rorge began to laugh. He laughed so hard that snot flew out of the hole where his nose had been. Biter sat on top of one of the dead men, holding a limp hand as he gnawed at his fingers. Yikes. Bones cracked between his teeth. Who are you, men? A crease appeared between Robot Glover's brows. You were not with Hote when he came to Lord Bolton's encampments. Are you of the brave companions? Rorge wiped the snot off his chin with the back of his hand. We are now. Jaqen reintroduces himself as Jaqen, indicates Rorge and Biter and introduces them. But when he points to Arya, Arya blurts out that no, she's Weasel. She wasn't sure she could trust this man, and she especially didn't want Rorge and Biter to hear her true name. Robot Glover dismisses her, and then they get to the bloody business. When they get up from the dungeons, they find Northmen running across the board, killing the shit out of all of the Lannisters. Rorge and Biter rushed off with Glover, but Jaqen H'ghar knelt beside Arya. A girl does not understand? Yes, I do, Arya said, though she didn't. Not truly. The Lorathi must have seen it on her face. A goat has no loyalty. Soon a wolf banner is raised here, I think. But first a man would hear a certain name unsaid. I take back the name, Arya said. Arya wonders whether she might still have a third name, and Jaqen accuses her of being greedy. So Arya agrees that the debt is paid. But now that a deed is done, a man must die. Wait, what? Yeah, Jaqen's time is done. Jaqen H'ghar passed a hand down his face from forehead to chin, and where it went, he changed. His cheeks grew full, his eyes closer, his nose hooked. A scar appeared on his right cheek where no scar had been before. And when he shook his head, his long straight hair, half red and half white, dissolved away to reveal a cap of tight black curls. Arya's mouth falls open, and she asks who Jaqen really is and how he did that thing he did. Was that difficult? Jaqen says, nah, not really, flashing a now gold-toothed smile. So Arya wants to know, well, okay then, High Speed, come with Jaqen across the narrow sea. I can, Arya said. I have to go home to Winterfell. Then we must part, he said, for I have duties too. He lifted her hand and pressed a small coin into her palm. Here. Jaqen places an iron coin into her hand and says, it's worth something, kid. Will it buy her horse? No. Then what good is it, Arya asked. As well ask, what good is life? What good is death? If the day comes when you would find me again, give that coin to any man from Bravos and say these words to him. Valor Morgullis. Valor Morgullis, Arya repeated. It wasn't hard. Her fingers closed tight over the coin. Across the yard, she could hear men dying. Please don't go, Jaqen. Jaqen is as dead as Ari, he said sadly. And I have promises to keep. Valor Morgullis, Arya Stark. Jaqen asks her to say it again, and Arya repeats, Valor Morgullis. Jaqen then bows and fades into the darkness, his dark cloak swirling very dramatically. Alone now, Arya thinks that the men who died deserve death, especially that shit knight known as Sir, in quotation marks, Amory Lorch, who had done many, many war crimes. Arya heads back to her chambers, whispers the names in her prayer one more time, and says Valor Morgullis at the end of it, falling asleep, wondering what the term meant. The next morning, Pink Eye and the others are back, except one kid who had been killed for no reason whatsoever. Lovely. Pink Eye heads out to find out what's what and returns to say that the Bloody Bombers killed most of Sir Amory's men in their beds or at table when they were drunk. But good news, Arya, the Northern Lord will be here soon, but y'all need to get back to work while you wait for him to arrive. All morning, Arya watched the Bloody Bombers strip the dead of their valuables and drag the corpses to the Flowstone yard where a pyre was laid to dispose of them. Shagwell the Fool hacked the heads off 2 dead knights and pranced about the castle, swinging them by the hair, making them talk. What did you die of? One head asked. Hot weasel soup, replied the other. Arya gets tasked with mopping up dried blood, and everyone stares at her when they think she's not looking, but they don't speak to her. Arya figures Robert Glover and the other Northmen must have talked. Shagwell had probably reframed what Arya did into his one-half mad jokes, and that night, the new lord arrives. Plain-faced, clean-shaven, pale, strange eyes, black ring mail, pink cloak, yoga pants. The sigil was a pink man. Yeah, pink man. A soldier orders Arya to kneel, and Vargohout steps forward, declaring that Harrenhal is his. The Lord says something, but he speaks too softly for Arya to hear what he says. Robert Glover and Sir Aenys Frey join the party, and then the leaders head over to Rorge and Biter. Arya thought they would get the fuck out from Harrenhal, but they had remained. And then Shagwell jumps on Arya. My lord, he's saying, tugging at her wrist. Here's the weasel who made the soup. Let go, Arya said, wiggling out of his gasp.
The Lord regarded her. Only his eyes moved. They were very pale, the color of ice. How old are you, child?
Arya had to think for a moment to remember. 10.
10, my lord, he reminded her. Are you fond of animals?
Some kinds, my lord.
A thin smile twitched across his lips. But not lions, it would seem. Nor manticores.
Arya's not sure what to say to that, so she says nothing. The Lord says they call her Weasel. Is that her actual name? Arya bites her lip, wondering at a name. Lumpyhead, Horseface, and Arya Underfoot were names she had gone by in the past, but they wouldn't do here. Nymeria, she said. Only she called me Nan for short.
You will call me my lord when you speak to me, Nan, the Lord said mildly. You are too young to be a brave companion, I think, and of the wrong sex. Are you afraid of leeches, child?
They're only leeches, my lord.
My squire could take a lesson from you, it would seem. Frequent leechings are the secret of a long life. A man must purge himself of bad blood. You will do, I think. For so long as I remain at Harrenhal, Nan, you shall be my cupbearer, and serve me at table and in chambers.
Arya knows better than to say anything, even if she would rather work the stables in order to escape. So she just says, yes, my lord. Roose Bolton then tells no one in particular to make Nan presentable, and then he orders Vargohout to attend to the banners above the gatehouse. 4 brave companions climb to the ramparts and haul down the line of Lannister and Sir Amory's own black manticore. In their place, they raise the flayed man of the Dreadfort and the direwolf of Stark. And that evening, a page named Nan poured wine for Roose Bolton and Vargohout as they stood on the gallery watching the brave companions parade Sir Amory Lorch naked through the middle ward. Sir Amory pleaded and sobbed and clung to the legs of his captors until Rorge pulled him loose and Shagwell kicked him down into the bear pit. The bear is all in black, Arya thought. Like Yoren. She filled Roose Bolton's cup and did not spill a drop. And that is the synopsis for A Clash of Kings, Arya IX, Part 2. You know, I love how this chapter starts at one spot, and then by the end of it, you just kind of totally forget where you were in Part 1. We did this last week. I love this chapter. What did you gentlemen think of it?
We've got even stronger material to work with here than last week. This is some of George's most consistently surprising writing in the series, each turn of the plot requiring the reader to scramble and reset our expectations. Arya's prison break turns out so differently than we might have thought, and then Jaqen blows our mind, and then leaves, and then Roose Bolton shows up to freak everyone out anew. The consistent thread through all this is Arya's struggle to achieve control over her life, and where that need leads her.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And all the pinballing around here at the end gives the chapter really sustained and engaging climax. The writing in here is agile and crafty on George's part, where Arya's own confusion around the situation mirrors what's going on with the reader as we're trying to parse the consequences of what's being played out on the page. It's, like I said, the first time I read it, it just right over my head. So, I think it's really effective there. And we touched on it here on Boys Gone Canon last week. And you've done so in Brand's chapters when George writes from the point of view of a child. He's really good at fleshing out that subtle naivete that causes the reader to have to read really closely or go back later, on a reread like we're doing here to kind of really fully grasp what's going on or make those connections, as the chapters progress. And a tiny little example of all this for me comes in at the end of the chapter, right before Roose shows up, where Shagwell's playing with the heads, and Arya in one sentence thinks, "Oh, I'm going to tell him to shut up. Only I wasn't so afraid of him." And the very next. Where last week we explored Arya encountering familiar. Sorry, guys. I'll go back a little bit. The tiny example coming in before Roose shows up, where Arya thinks she should tell Shagwell to shut up when he's playing with the heads, if only she wasn't so afraid of him. And in the very next sentence, she's threatening to add him to the kill list if he doesn't watch his ass. So with no one around to comfort her, or to sympathize, she's got to comfort herself or be eaten alive, really. And there's a bit of a tonal shift here as well that mirrors Arya's journey, where in last week we were kind of talking about the familiar faces that Arya's encountering, the kind of known quantities in Hot Pie and Gendry that we've seen spend lots of time with Arya in her previous chapters. And then of Jaqen Smash for Paradigms with his sick-ass Mission Impossible mask technology, and Roose upping the ante on the creep factor by several orders of magnitude. And Emmett likes to point out, Euron smashing not only the narrative of Song of Ice and Fire, but the genre itself in which the story is being told, from Arthurian fantasy on its way to horror. And so between the ghosts and the vampiric Roose, we see those elements creeping into the fantasy world of castles and knights and dragons. Part of what makes the maneuver and Roose's whole thing so shocking and, dare I say, enticing to Arya is their lack of familiarity or analog in her life up to this point. And I think George really, really fleshes that out well.
I absolutely agree. I think he does a really good job of fleshing it out. And I think one of my favorite George touches, and I've talked about this before, is how he undercuts moments of triumph and seeming catharsis with a, hey, this doesn't feel actually all that good. I mean, Sir Emery Lorch and his band of war criminals that earn their deaths many, many times over by their blatantly illegal and immoral conduct during the Rain Tarbeck Rebellion, Robert's Rebellion, and now the War of the Five Kings. We should never forget that Emery Lorch is a childbirth, not once, twice, over having thrown the last Lord of Tarbeck, an 8-year-old boy, down a well and then stabbed Rhaenys Targaryen, a 3-year-old girl, dozens of times after dragging her from bed. I have a 3-year-old daughter. A bear feels like too good of a fate for Emery Lorch. But that catharsis I'm feeling at the end of this chapter and about Amory and his soldiers getting theirs, it's undercut by this brutal line from just before we get to that conclusion of Amory Lorch being kicked into the bear pit, when Arya learns that Pink Eye and his charges had all survived except one person, one boy, who'd been killed in the fighting for no reason that anyone could say. The triumph of watching war criminals and child murderers get got is spoiled because another act of child murder has been committed by the liberators of Harrenhal. And boy, what a liberation, as we're going to find out in a few months' time when we get to Arya 10's, when we get to A Clash of Kings Arya 10. And that's why I agree with both you gentlemen, as we talked about last week and this week. This is the best Arya chapter in A Clash of Kings.
So, to pick up where we left off last time, Arya steps back outside the Oasis of the Godswood to find that Harrenhal has woken up, all abustle with life thanks to Vargo Hoat's arrival. The plunder has all mysteriously vanished, but the bear is still there, a naked threat being made angrier by people tormenting it. All the men are drinking, which Arya thinks of as a convenient distraction, and so it is, but not for her. George's brilliant gambit here, what makes it so unexpected as we were talking about, is to nestle Arya's master plan within Roose Bolton's. The two plans intersect without ever knowing about one another. They unfold simultaneously. So even as George keeps our POV down low with Arya and her plan, we see Roose's plan go to work around the edges. As Jaqen tells Arya, the hungry gods will feed on blood tonight if they go through with her plan to take over Harrenhal. And in truth, those gods would have fed on blood anyway. Jaqen gives Arya one last chance to pull back. She refuses, and so he puts her to work. Go to the kitchens and help them make lots and lots of broth. As Stephen Atwell touched on in his terrific essay on this chapter, there is a wonderful mundanity to this plan, in stark, so to speak, contrast to Jaqen's mysterious otherworldly powers. He doesn't take over Harrenhal with, sparks flying from his wand. He gets Arya to go back to the kitchens, where she started the chapter, and engage in the grounded, tangible tasks of servitude they all do every day here. These are the instruments of Arya's rebellion, the sustenance of the material world, the labor and sweat demanded by their overseers. The story of A Clash of Kings is political and magical power coming together to transform into something singular, something both new and very old. Arya used her third wish with her weird wizard mentor in order to spark a political takeover of Harrenhal, waged with nothing but metal and water.
Right. It's very ordinary for this character who is extraordinarily magical, as we're going to discover here momentarily. And I have to wonder, is this like a plan that Jaqen had conceived all along? Like, oh yeah, I have this figured. I've been working on this for weeks and weeks. Or was it just this amazing improv? There are no prior mentions of Vargo Hoat's fondness for broth or soup anywhere in A Clash of Kings. Don't worry. I used a search of Ice and Fire to figure this out. This, very key moment out. But Jaqen snaps the devotion like he's had this all figured out for months. Whatever. And the best improv, I think, doesn't look like improv at all, I guess. Regardless, the plan as it stands rests on a few facts and assumptions. The first fact is that Amory Lorch's garrison is spread out and not able to mass together to fight off the soup attack. This is something that Arya notes over and over again as she's walking through Harrenhal, saying, here there used to be 1,000 doors with 100 people on it. Here there used to be 1,000 doors with 1,000 people on it. Now there's 1,000 doors with 100 people on it. There are fewer and fewer people at Harrenhal than there were back in Arya 6 and 7. An assumption that Jaqen makes is that Arya will be able to order the cook around given her status as working for Pink Eye, who of course works for Amory Lorch. So the irony, in my opinion, is that the system set up by the nobility at large to force the small folk into slavish obedience to authority is now being turned against the nobility by Jaqen. And I think that's the real brilliance of Jaqen's plan. If you come to think about it just a little bit, just apply a little bit of logic and rationality here, maybe the cook should have questioned a girl giving an order for broth at midnight, realizing that the order doesn't make any fucking sense whatsoever. But the conditioning imposed by the Amory Lorches of this world ensures that Arya and Jaqen can get away with it. The nobility, I guess, eat soup and itself.
There's really no incentive to question it, even in an order that seems ridiculous. Well, what if it's still legit? Then you're going to be the ones in trouble for questioning it. And then, that's exactly how they can hijack this little power structure and get away with it. So Arya gets sent to fetch Paya, who is fucking one of the Bloody Mummers. Again, as I said last week, A Clash of Kings Arya 9 is about the intersection between fear and desire, a primal dynamic that largely defines the emotional state of human beings. As such, the chapter foregrounds both sex and violence in a quasi-ambiguous interplay that affects how Arya will view both going forward. Arya tells Paya to fetch butter and cheese quickly, or Vargo Hoat will chop off her foot. So we've gone from sex to violence that quickly, in a heartbeat, in a couple of sentences. It's not the last time Arya uses Vargo Hoat as a figure of fear, a boogeyman in this way. She threatens Gendry with mutilation to get him to leave Harrenhal with her. Certainly, Arya does not bear responsibility for what Vargo Hoat actually does, which is whatever he wanted to do anyway. But this is part of the dynamic in her story where she recoils from all this violence while also beginning to understand how to use it rhetorically in order to wield power over other people. Isn't this just basically the childish equivalent of Jaime threatening the trebuchet in A Feast for Crows while telling himself he'd never use it?
Mm-hmm.
Even as Arya dashes off, however, George does some terrific setup work, again, around the margins, by having Arya wonder why none of the Northern prisoners were mutilated like that in the way she just described. Huh, yeah, Arya, that's weird. I wonder why that might be. It's almost like they're not actually prisoners, but the new allies of the Bloody Mummers.
That's the subtle naivete and the sleight of hand of George at work.
Yeah, it's perfect, but he couches it just so enough that he's playing fair with you. The information is there, but there's no way you're going to pick up on that as significant your first time through because he's keeping your attention in so many other places. Arya used the threat of Vargo as a lie to get Paya moving, and similarly, Vargo is weaving the image of imprisonment around the Northmen, and that image is going to fade before long. Arya returns to the kitchen and briefly considers letting Hot Pie in on the plan, but then remembers the village by the lake and thinks he'd only yield again. He'd blow the plan. As we saw with Gendry last week, that time in the village is a primal scene to which these kids keep returning, reforging their worldviews around it. Sadly, it has not served to bring them together so much as drive them apart, because it led them to very different conclusions about the world and each other. Gendry, as we saw, can't quite trust Arya, and she, in turn, feels like she can't quite trust Hot Pie. So instead, she gets the worst companions imaginable. Rorge and Biter, the demons Jaqen summoned up from hell, as she thinks of them. And they play an important role in this chapter. That role is getting Arya to doubt the righteousness of what she's doing. Rorge and Biter love killing, for killing's sake, and she is giving them more men to kill. The phrase bloody broth is repeated several times in this scene, a blunt way of communicating to the reader that this broth is about to literally spill blood.
Mm-hmm.
Jaqen continues to make Arya complicit in the bloodletting, having her help carry the broth even though, her tiny child muscles are barely useful in such a task. Together, they hurl the broth in the faces of the guards. George dwells on this moment, emphasizing the agonized shock of their screaming and the callous brutality with which Rorge and Biter kill them, one by one. Only one even gets a chance to fight back. Jaqen takes him down quickly, and then wipes his sword clean on Arya's shift. It's an important moment. This heart blood is on your hands. Jaqen called Arya an evil child, and now he carries that forward. Not as condemnation, but something arguably more frightening. Initiation, baptism in blood. Welcome to the ranks of killers, is what he's trying to say.
Yeah.
That's fucking sick.
Agreed.
No, I think there's a great religious context which Jaqen is doing this effort in. And the point I pulled from this is Jaqen wiping the blood onto Arya's shirt is that Arya is being anointed as high priest to go on before the Holy of Holies. In Tabernacle and Second Temple Judaism, and you guys can both come at me because I'm basing this off of my Sunday school memories in Catholic and Presbyterian churches, the high priest would be consecrated as a high priest by the killing of a spotless lamb, and then the blood of the lamb would then be smeared onto his garments in order to stand in front of the almighty and holy presence of God. Here, the blood marks Arya's initiation into a priesthood of sorts, as Arya will discover in A Feast for Crows. But the god the faceless men worship is not the red god, as Jaqen sort of hints at in kind of a teasing way, but rather the god of death. Arya has sacrificed Chiswick, Weiss, and now a dozen or more proximate Lance Dragoons to the god of death, and she stands ready to enter the ranks. Arya, as you were saying, has been initiated in blood, and Jaqen will then extend the formal invitation in just a moment.
As Jaqen says, this counts as Arya's third wish. And unlike Chiswick and Weiss, we don't even know this guy's name. So Arya's kill list, her need for revenge on the world, that doesn't make sense. That kill list doesn't shrink. And then George really shows his hand, unraveling the puzzle box of Arya IX, and in the process, undercutting any triumph Arya might possibly feel about this. The Northmen file out of their cell, but none of them seem injured anymore. More to the point, none of them seem surprised to be let loose. The only thing their commander, Robert Glover, is surprised by is, "This of the soup, that was clever. I did not expect that. Was it Lord Hote's idea?" Wait a minute, Lord Hote? All at once, our understanding of the situation has been shattered. These men were not prisoners at all. They made a deal with Vargo Hote, who has switched sides to the Northmen in the wake of Lannister losses, and also probably because he just doesn't like Emery Lorch. There was already a plan in place to free these men, to wipe out Emery Lorch's men and take over the castle. Arya needn't have done anything at all. On first read, what stands out is the intricately crafted irony of this, the way George springs the revelation that all of Arya's efforts were for nothing. On reread, however, what lingers is the emotional quality, the sense of wretchedness and nihilism settling on her shoulders as a result of how this plays out. George cuts from Robert's revelation to Rorge laughing. It's a hideous sight. One of the worst people in the story reveling in his fate, his snot flying. Biter sits nearby, gnawing on bones. Arya has inadvertently saved their lives again. That's the difference between her doing nothing and her doing this unnecessary plan. That's what she contributed to. Robert wonders at their presence. They were members of the Brave Companions. Wait, are they now? They sure are, says Rorge. They can turn cloaks again, finding new patrons to support their atrocities, just as with the Bloody Mummers themselves. This is what Arya has done. If she didn't come up with this plan and unwittingly enlist them, they would have been killed with the rest of Emery Lorch's men. Arya thought she was changing the world for the better, but the practical effect of her actions was that the worst people in Westeros get to keep going. Meddling in both magical and political power with the best of intentions has led her to ruin, and not only that, but to irrelevance and neglect from the very forces she was counting on to save her. Arya did all this for Robert Glover, to free someone she regarded as practically kin by comparison to the other people around her. But she doesn't want to reveal her identity to him now because she would also be revealing it to Rorge and Biter, the men she didn't want there, the men she has once more saved. So she sticks with Weasel, the name she wanted to leave behind forever. And Robert Glover dismisses her on that basis, like she's not even there, even though she just helped save him. He's a well-intentioned man, as we see whenever he pops up in the series, but he bears the prejudices of his class. We've been talking about the differences in worldview between Arya and her friends who were raised as small folk. But in the beholder's eyes, in Robert Glover's eyes in this moment, with that name Weasel, she's one of them. She's a non-person, and she has not escaped that for all her efforts here.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And this is also not the last time that Arya will bear witness to a surprise massacre, because it's here that George and Roose Bolton do a dry run for the Red Wedding, just one book hence. We have ostensible allies coming into a castle and feasting together, everyone getting drunk. But it's all a ruse for Emery Lorch's men to let down their guard before the Bloody Mummers and their captive, Northmen and Freys, come with hidden axe and sword. I mean, you were bringing up this earlier about the cook's statement that the bloody broth is not bloody ready. And Sandor Clegane will tell Arya that he's hoping to make it to the twins in time for her uncle's bloody wedding come a storm of swords. The difference here is that it's 100 Lannister goons who got instead of thousands of Northmen who were murdered at the twins. Also, there's no sense that guest right was extended to this party, but that's beside the point. Now, it's not entirely clear who came up with the plan of getting everyone good and drunk and then killing them, as it's only stated that Vargo Hote approached Roose Bolton's camp. There is one hint that it might have been Vargo Hote's idea, as Robert Glover asked if the soup was Vargo's idea. That might imply that it was Vargo rather than Roose who came up with the plan to infiltrate Harrenhal, get the Lannisters drunk, and kill them all from within the castle. But Roose, he was watching, observing, seeing if this plan would work. Now, as we talked about in Tyrion 8 from A Game of Thrones and Arya 7 from A Clash of Kings, Roose wasn't planning the Red Wedding yet. The Starks were winning, the Lannisters were losing, and Roose Bolton wasn't planning on switching sides to the losing side. And that's going to come later. Beyond that, Tywin hadn't entered King's Landing yet, and he wasn't sending birds to Harrenhal to work out an arrangement with Roose Bolton and Walder Frey. That, as we're going to talk about in Arya 10, is going to be occurring there. Regardless of Roose still being a Stark loyalist, here, when the plan did work out, you get the sense that Roose kind of said, that's interesting, tucked it into his pocket for a later date. Come storm, Roose Bolton took Vargohote's plan to take Harrenhal and remixed it to put a stake or sword through the heart of Robb Stark's cause.
Yeah, I like that a lot. The tying back into Arya's lack of direct familiarity with Roose and his whole thing that he does and her degrees of removal from the politics at hand that we've been talking about here. To that end, it kind of makes the Red Wedding planning that much more insidious if she's sitting there filling his cup while he's starting to turn the gears in his head that ends up with her brother being betrayed and stabbed through the heart, manifesting her mother's primal exhausted grief through those thoughts and actions. Grief so strong it can't even be killed. So this kind of magical thinking is something I'm going to explore here in a little bit, but I really like that George plays with these different levels of strategy and scheming between the lines of the sudden and bloody action.
There's so many short-term and long-term story beats and story shapes at work here. The reader is working hard just to keep up with what's going on. And as Zach was saying earlier, George slyly mirrors that process with Arya herself. She is a little too young, too over her head, and also just too stressed to pick up on what is happening around and through her. It is only Jaqen who is left to explain things to her, because everyone else immediately moved on to play their roles in a story bigger than her. Jaqen puts everything in animal terms, as McCall said in Arya 8. His perspective is detached. Like a god, he's viewing man's affairs from the outside, like we might watch a nature documentary. The goat has no loyalty, he says, and has turned on the lions. Soon a wolf banner will be raised here instead. Your army, your pack, is coming in force. The kill list filled that hole inside, the sense of justice and meaning that died with her father. And then Jaqen made her feel more than a mouse, bringing that kill list to life, allowing her to strike back and retake control. And now that journey appears to be over. The wolves have come again. Arya is free of her tormentors and does not need Jaqen H'ghar anymore. All part of the hero's journey, right? The mentor prepares you and then lets you go. But Arya still asks for that third death back. She is greedy, as Jaqen says, trying to extend the deal as long as she can. It's not out of bloodthirst that Arya makes this request. It's out of a desire to feel in control of her own life. She thought she had done so with Weasel Soup, but that spun out of her control and then turned out to be redundant. Without Jaqen, she has no power. But when Jaqen tells her that the debt has been paid with blood several times over, well, she understands. She makes her peace, her deal with death. The loop is closed. Arya is never going to be able to just snap out of what a violent world has made of her, but she proves here that she does not love violence itself. Rather, she grew accustomed to its taste because it was the closest she could find to the taste of justice. She had 3 wishes to make justice happen. She tried her best, but this is still a fallen and forsaken world around her. Arya was clever enough to manipulate Jaqen into bending the rules of the 3-wish structure. But now her cleverness and luck have run out. Now, as she says, she was just a mouse again, having glimpsed the structure of power, taken part in it, and been spat out the other side. And it is in this moment that Jaqen H'ghar changes Arya's understanding of that structure of power, permanently blowing her little mind. A strange smile touches his lips. He passes his hand over his face, and his flesh ripples and swells and transforms, magic reshaping his body. Nothing could possibly have prepared Arya for this, save old Nan's stories, maybe, made real in a way she still never could have seen coming. She is too astonished to even be afraid. wonder briefly overtaking terror, the giddy dizziness of having one's worldview smashed to pieces. The reader feels the same way. Even in the middle of a very busy, consequential chapter, trying to keep up with the plot and Arya's unfolding character arc, Jaqen changing his face brings everything to a halt to absorb the implications. We have heard the phrase faceless man bandied about in King's Landing politics, but with no exposition about who they are beyond very expensive assassins. We have seen plenty of hints in these Arya chapters that there is something strange, even sorcerous, about Jaqen H'ghar, but that's all they were. Hints, signs, inferences. And now we get the proof of concept. A miracle in the daylight. A seismic, instantaneous transformation of matter, by no means but one's will. This is one of the big magical moments in A Clash of Kings, in which the age of wonder and terror, coinciding with the Game of Thrones, makes itself known. It's the climax of the magical aspect of Arya's storyline in this book, as with Bran opening his third eye, or Dany wandering the House of the Undying. It's the spotlight scene for her magical mentor figure, his equivalent of Melisandre birthing a deadly shadow beneath Storm's End. So you can clearly map this moment onto other moments in the book. It's part of the overall structural ramp-up of the book going into its third act. But as with those other magical moments in A Clash of Kings, it also bears characteristics unique to this storyline, this setting, and these characters. Once Bran opens his third eye, his commitment to Jojen's agenda is made ironclad, and Jaqen follows that path unflinchingly, even unto his own death. Once Melisandre has seduced Stannis, literally and figuratively, and birthed shadows, the die is cast that will lead them both to the sacrifice of Shireen. The Warlocks pursue Dany until running afoul of Euron anyway, and Quaithe pops in to check on Dany throughout A Storm of Swords and A Dance with Dragons. So these are now, they've become consistent built-in parts of the central character's story. In this storyline, however, the moment of truth with the magical mentor works differently. Jaqen performs this miracle, and Arya's desire wins out over fear. All she wants in that moment is to be able to change her face. And can you blame her? What makes this moment so poignant is that Arya has already been changing faces. It's her main survival strategy. From the start of the book, she's been disguising herself. Pretending to be a boy, pretending to be lowborn, pretending not to be angry at everything. She's been Arya, she's been Weasel, and she's always been Arya Stark underneath those other faces. Jaqen makes the comparison explicit, saying Jaqen is as dead as Arya. These are the people we were, not the people we are. And it's not just her that works this way, it's everyone. The Bloody Mummers just changed faces to become Northmen. Rorge and Biter changed faces to join them. All Jaqen has done is make the metaphor literal. He can change his actual physical face, not just change his attitude and personality as needed. And Arya sees the possibilities of that, the relief from suffering. Her connections to her old identity keep bringing her pain. Her memories of family and home just make her feel the loss all the keener. Crying out Winterfell turned out to be a bad thing. Even freeing the Northmen didn't bring her old life back. At some level, she's wondering if she might be better off leaving it all behind. If she can't get it back no matter how she tries, why keep hurting herself? Maybe it would be better to drift in the void like Jaqen, always smelling like soap in his eerily perfect pocket universes, serving all gods and so none. We, of course, don't want that for Arya. We want her back with the pack. Harrenhal itself is a cautionary tale for climbing the fiery ladder. You lose your soul. But we feel the temptation, which is why this is such a good character arc. Arya will eventually follow that temptation in Feast and Dance, but not here, which is what separates this storyline from the rest in A Clash of Kings. Arya's magical and political paths are diverging, sprung loose from one another as a result of her intervening on the wider stage of Harrenhal. So when Jaqen asks her to come with him, far and away across the narrow sea, she says no. She still just wants to go home to Winterfell. And Jaqen doesn't even put up a fight. He just pieces out. This is what makes him so different from all those other magical mentors. He lets her go. He doesn't have the obsessive, all-consuming focus on the Messiah that defines Jojen and Melisandre and presumably Quaithe. Jaqen didn't come here for her. As he says, he has other duties, and she remains underfoot.
Oh, absolutely. And what I like here is that George is putting his own take on several substeps in this departure part of Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, as you were talking about before about Joseph Campbell. The departure is broken down into 5 substages known as the call to adventure, refusal of the call, supernatural aid, the crossing of the first threshold, and belly of the whale. Here we see in microcosm the first 3 stages, but George remixes the order of things. In George's telling, it goes supernatural aid, the call to adventure, refusal of the call. Jaqen provides supernatural aid in being the magic murder genie while using ordinary means of actually attaining the skill set of killing Weiss, Chiswick, and a slew of guards guarding the Northmen. Then Jaqen calls Arya to come with him across the narrow sea to learn the skill of changing his face. Arya then refuses this call as her first thought is returning to Winterfell and reuniting with her family. The belly of the other 2 stages, the belly of the whale and the crossing of the first threshold, come quite literally at the end of A Clash of Kings Arya 10 when Arya makes her first deliberate kill and walks out of Harrenhal, as we'll cover here in a few months' time. Now, George has talked a little bit about Joseph Campbell's work, stating, well, I'm certainly familiar with Joseph Campbell, but no, consciously, I've not included a lot of that. It's kind of unclear to me whether Arya IX is one of those spare moments where George consciously emulated Joseph Campbell's work, but even if it wasn't the conscious attempt to replicate the hero's journey, a la George Lucas in the original Star Wars trilogy, it's impossible not to inadvertently write Campbell into any story.
That's one of those quotes from George I got to say, where he says, "Oh, I didn't expect people to romanticize Sandor." Where you look at him askance and go, "Really? Dude, you have to know how much of this stuff, like the many-faced god." Just to pick on Arya's storyline, like the many-faced god is just a literalization of everything Campbell was writing about. But it's Campbell was of course drawing from a lot of different sources. George was in large part just drawing from the same sources. So I think it's more just kind of parallel work. And as you said, Jeff, this stuff is just kind of leached into pop culture so strongly. It's like trying to avoid Lovecraft that we were talking about in the recent Forsaken episode. You kind of can't if you're going to be working within a certain genre. You're either cleaving to or from that model. And I think that's exactly what George is doing here. Mm-hmm. And so Jaqen just becomes another adult with better things to do. Like how there was already a plan to take over Harrenhal being pitched right over Arya's head. Jaqen is going to walk away from her, like Yoren, like Ned. And while he doesn't die like they did, he also was never really alive like they were. He leaves her not with a grand eschatological arc, but with a simple, humble coin. This is the key to your future. It is not for the buying of horses, he says. So Arya doesn't understand what good it is, because she wants horses, tangible physical power, like the flower that was all over Hot Pie's arms. Jaqen says she might as well ask, what good is life? What good is death? The coin belongs to that realm, the philosophical, the metaphysical. It's the coin from No Country for Old Men, basically, a symbol of chance and fate intersecting, intertwining, the individual caught among them. The end result is always death. And that's the other totem Jaqen leaves behind, Fallow Morgulis. It's something else pitched over Arya's head. A language she can't understand, like she couldn't understand Roos's plan as it unfolded around her. But the deeper concept is something she knows all too well by this point. All men must die. A stranger walks away from her, wearing Jaqen's clothes. She never knew him at all. And he was ultimately only the stranger, the god of death. Arya is left alone with corpses of the men she helped kill. They deserve to die, she tells herself. She has reason to think that. But that doesn't change the fact that she's alone with them, with no one living to love or be loved by. Such are the wages of the kill list, the 3 wishes, the fiery ladder, and the Game of Thrones alike. This is what Harrenhal always leaves you with. Arya is marked by death, drowning in corpses. For all her magical mentor's pretensions to mastery, what he ultimately did was draw her deeper into this mass grave.
She says it herself. I am the ghost in Harrenhal.
Yep, and to be a ghost, you gotta die. As powerful as it is, as spooky as it is, it means you've joined the corpses, and you haven't really won after all at some level. And again, that's a dynamic we're gonna be touching on much more when we get to Arya 10. So, as Jeff noted earlier, Everyone in Arya's little work group makes it back to their beds alive, except for one boy, who had been killed for no reason at all. Such are the wages of Arya's coup, striking back in force against her oppressors, only to find she has done nothing but keep the wheel turning. As for the living, they are sentenced to sweat for the new lord, as they were for the old. For Arya of House Stark, it matters a great deal who holds Harrenhal. For the laborers who maintain the place, it doesn't really matter at all. As Gendry said, they're just gonna keep working, regardless. Arya has to watch them strip and burn the bodies, and she has to mop up the blood. Her face is shoved in the brutality of her ostensibly good works. What has changed is how Arya herself is perceived by the people around her. Just like how Jaqen said it was her true name that mattered, not his. Pink Eye regards her differently. Everyone seems to be staring and whispering. Worst of all, Shagwell does a gruesome puppet show with some knights' heads, in which he says they died of weasel soup.
I can't imagine that Arya can see a severed head without thinking of Ned and having some level of PTSD triggered or ingrained there. And, you know, her relationship with Ned, it's always at the margins. She never thinks directly, you know, like you guys talked about his stories of Harrenhal or anything like that. But these kinds of, you know, aspects of her relationship with him are always kind of hovering around her story the way through.
Yeah. And it's also kind of why you get the sense of why she's considering putting Shagwell on her death list. And that kind of makes sense given that a number of the folks in the death list are all related to Ned Stark's death at the end of A Game of Thrones. And thinking about Shagwell, we're getting a taste of this new batch of brutality and horror, which is going to unfold Harrenhal under this new management. Shagwell kind of reads as George's take of the killer clown stock character we see in horror, perhaps seen in best in Stephen King's It. Like almost everyone in Harrenhal, Shagwell is not supernatural per se, but his appearance, his actions speak to the type of monster which arises from dark fairy tale. But he also seems based on real-world people like John Wayne Gacy, the serial killer, rapist, and torturer who killed over 33 people. Everywhere that we see Shagwell in the story, he's doing some new form of shittery, kicking Jaime to the ground in a storm of swords so Zolo can hack off his hand, attempting to rape Brienne, murdering Nimble Dick Crab, and only finally getting Brienne when he tries to murder Brienne as well. Shagwell serves as, I think, another beat on George's layered critique of war. In a Westeros without war, Shagwell would have never arrived as a sellsword with the Brave Companions. But now that he's here, he acts with sociopathic impunity, unpunished by the Tywins and Roose Boltons of the world because he serves their purpose. He brings fear. Where other people shrink away at the brutal slaughter that's just unfolded, and even Arya is forced to rationalize all the death. Oh, they deserved it, and everything like that. You can tell it's definitely rationalization. Shagwell is laughing, swinging severed heads by the hair, making them talk. You can almost make a metaphor of what Shagwell does is similar to what the White Walkers do in forcing the dead to do their will. And coming off the end of The Second Coming Part 4, our full analysis of The Windsman of the Forsaken, Shagwell works as the prologue to Euron and the woman with white fire hands laughing from the Iron Throne as horrors unfold below them. Shagwell is just wretched, man, and he's just a wretched individual and character, and he's not alone among the evil characters that comprise the Brave Companions.
And now these people are spreading her story, because even though Robert Glover in the moment lacked interest in her as an individual, seemingly a peasant girl, seems like he couldn't resist telling a good story. All Arya can think to do about this is add Shagwell to her list. Arya clings to her list even after her 3 wishes are up, even after she's run out of ways to, make her list happen. But what else does she have? Everything has changed, yet at the same time, nothing has changed. And it is in that context that Roose Bolton arrives to take charge of Harrenhal. We have met him before, back in Bran and Catelyn's chapters in Book 1 when Robb was getting his army together. George took time to establish in those chapters that Roose is creepy, with his stares and soft voice. But this chapter, along with Arya 10, is really the coming out party for perhaps the fan favorite villain in A Song of Ice and Fire, the Leech Lord of the Dreadfort. In his own way, he's a nowhere man, like Jaqen, as hard to define as he is to ignore. They have similar color schemes, red and white versus pink and pale. George describes Roose as neither handsome nor ugly, neither thin nor fat, neither tall nor short. This could make Roos unmemorable in our mind's eye, but it's quite the opposite. Every reader of A Song of Ice and Fire remembers Roos the Noose. That's because of the signature tone that defines him, the chill in the room that seems to accompany him like the White Walkers, an all-encompassing aura of dread, which is only appropriate given the name of his castle, the wonderfully unsubtle Dreadfort. What makes Roos so terrifying is not easy to pin down, which is by design. He is a man of contrasts, languid in his effect, but monstrous in his works, intricate in his planning, yet evanescent in his motivations and emotions. What drives Roose Bolton? This is both a simple and complex question. On the one hand, his drives are clear. He loves domination in every respect, politically, sexually, even physically over himself via leeching. Roos is the embodiment of control. His scenes wield a sick fascination over the reader because we are watching a barely restrained beast. At any moment, we know he could snap. George does an incredible job conveying this constant tension to both the reader and other characters. What's lurking behind those misty eyes? What is he barely keeping at bay with those leeches? As rereaders, we know the answer. Ramsay. Ramsay is Roos minus restraint, just like how Tyrion is Tywin minus restraint. And that's why those relationships end precisely the same way. The unfettered id inevitably turns resentfully on the controlling superego. Fictional families don't come much more Freudian than the Lannisters and the Bolton. Roos lets loose exactly once. The Red Wedding. That's what's waiting for us. That's his primal driving desire, what he really looks like inside. Up until that point, he's playing along with a society that will not allow him to unleash his dark dreams until he has amassed enough power to get away with it. Roos is more restrained than Ramsay, not in that he refrained from committing atrocities, he still does, but in that he always keeps an eye on his audience. He always keeps in mind how this is going to play with the Starks. First Rickard, then Ned, now Robb. He's always thinking about how to keep the information from them and how to filter what they do hear about. As such, Roos's mask goes very deep. And that's what makes him such a complex and such a popular character. Despite that simple power drive, the execution of his character leaves us with all these ambiguities to discuss. Take this scene, for example. If I just tell you what happens, Roos sounds like a pretty okay guy. He's the hero of this situation, in fact. Roos calls Arya over. He teases her gently about weasel soup. He asks her true name. He compliments her bravery. He mildly reminds her about her manners. And then he takes her under his wing as his new cupbearer. Well, he certainly sounds better than a lot of these outwardly rude and angry and cruel types, right? Well, it's only in the execution, the lived experience of standing in front of Roose Bolton, that things get very weird and very frightening. Only Roos's eyes move. Pale eyes, unnaturally pale, the color of ice. Roose is not literally a White Walker, that's more Euron's arc, but he is meant to evoke their presence. He's not a blustering brute like Rorge, no, he's more detached. Roose's thin smile and whispered words don't reassure Arya, even though he is objectively praising her work and improving her situation. There's something off, as though Roose is something profoundly inhuman only playing at being a man. Thus, Roose emerges as the literary heir to Damon Julian, the vampiric villain of George's 1982 novel Fever Dream we have been covering for patrons, described as a tall, handsome animal in Burgundy, and there was nothing the least bit human about it. In the context of Fever Dream, the aim of this dynamic is to impress upon the audience how the genteel, cultured surface of old Europe, embodied by the vampires in that novel, papered over hideous violence rooted in greed, the original sin that took root and spread in the New World via slavery. In the context of A Song of Ice and Fire, Roose represents how far the nobility can go in Westeros before someone intervenes. He always just goes up just against that border. As they say in A Dance with Dragons, when they're, they want to rebel against Ramsay, but they say, a man can deal with Roose. He has made it so. That reputation is his triumph and the condemnation of the society that has allowed him to prosper. They deem this man acceptable. And this is because he wields power over information, of course. No one else quite knows what he's actually up to. But it's also because the men of his class are just not inclined to respond to the suffering he creates unless it disturbs their customs, their rights, their sleep. Ramsay bugs them. Roose knows better.
He does know better, and Roose, like Walder Frey, has a significant army that he can bring to bear on the battlefield. And that's similar to the phrase in that Roose works as a necessary evil. The size of Bolton's sworn men who could show up for any battlefield is quite large. As we find out sort of in A Dance with Dragons, Roose has upwards of 4,000 Bolton bannermen on the field, making him second only to the Mannerleys and the numbers of Northmen soldiers he can bring to a fight. Roose Bolton may scare Robb, as he says in Brand 6 from A Game of Thrones. He may have weird pale eyes, and he may come from a castle called the Dreadfort, but in war, you need those men at your side, right? Well, I mean, given the Roose's conduct in the War of the Five Kings, I'd say a very definitive no, but the numbers are the numbers. And this to me feels like a commentary on George's part about the compromises with evil that leaders feel that they have to make. Ned provides, I think, the counterpoint to this, stating that some bannermen are not worth having or keeping. And to be fair, Roose is very clever. To be fair, Roose is very clever to cover up his tracks and not let on that he probably tried to get as many loyal Northmen killed at the Green Fork. He's also very clever as well to ensure that his crimes, as you were pointing out, Emmett, don't actually hinder or impugn the nobility. He allows himself to immunize himself from the potential arrests that awaited people like the Jorah Mormonts of this world that Ned Stark was willing to come to Bear Island to arrest for his brushing up against the actual illegalities of Westeros. His crimes are ones that we never see, and that makes him so dangerous and so unexpected in some places that when we come up to the Red Wedding, not until he stabs Robb Stark through the heart do we actually know that he is the villain of the story.
That's a great comparison to Jorah Mormont. Like, that's exactly what Roose would never permit to happen to himself. Like, he must have witnessed that and went, what a fool, Jorah Mormont. That you let word get to Ned about this. I would never permit that to happen if I enslaved someone. I would never let word get to Winterfell about that. I have things under control here. We don't operate like that in the Dreadfort lands. No, sir. Roose is a polite surface ladled over a mass grave, exposing how superficial those norms are. Tywin functions in a similar way. No wonder they get along. Tywin, however, is rooted in Greek and Shakespearean villains, and so he is made legible on a human level. You come to understand him even if you don't justify his actions. Roose, as a character, is rooted in horror, Southern Gothic horror, as much as vampire stories, and so he remains fundamentally illegible in terms of his deeper currents beyond domination. He just is. It's so chilling how casually he enforces the class hierarchy on Arya in this scene, only mildly reminding her that she can call him my lord and saying, "Oh, you'll do. Oh, you'll do." The mildness is what terrifies us. We see from Roose's actions, starting in this chapter, that he is capable of far worse. So when he holds back, we feel no lasting relief. We feel that we have barely dodged a bullet, and more will be coming soon. Arya is made presentable, as Roose says, taught to pour wine without spilling a drop. Everything is in its right place. But beneath that placid surface seethes nameless fear. Jaws perpetually trembling about you, held back by restraints that are permanently on the verge of snapping. That is life under Roose Bolton. The door through which Arya walks gladly, because it means the downfall of her hated foes, the Lannisters. Sir Amory Lorch is dragged, naked and sobbing, through the castle before being tossed into the bear pit in view of his previous allies. Now, of course, Amory is the absolute worst. Much as I'm inclined against our modern systems of capital punishment, in this context, a swift execution by the commander on the scene would be the most just resolution. But this, dragging him through the castle as he screams and throwing him to a bear, It's hard to call this justice because the cause being served here is not redress for the many crimes of Amory Lorch. The cause being served here is the dominion of Roose Bolton and the bloodlust of Vargo Hout and his brave companions. Is justice really being done here?
Probably not. I mean, someone getting tossed into a bear pit in order to be ripped to pieces by a bear is cruel and unusual under any circumstances. And I was thinking that the casual cruelty, the bloody mummers, and throwing rocks at the bear that might have been used to stir up the rage in the bear itself to attack a human being, as bears very rarely attack humans unless they're mistreated or threatened by humans. Vargo Hout brought that bear into Harrenhal in order to kill a man in the most brutal way possible. So yeah, I guess it's not justified. But I really do feel the emotions Arya's experiencing over Amory's death. I would not spill a drop in the drink for Roose Bolton either. Nope. Might have lost Zach there for a moment.
That kind of sick, I'm sure.
Do. You know any good songs?
Jeopardy music plays, right? Oh, he's looking very reassuring at us.
He does. Yeah. I mean, I love those eyes.
That's
They're
nice
just
and comforting.
beautiful. Yeah. Thank you all for sticking around and watching us, of course. We appreciate it as always. We don't usually get to say thank you in the middle of the episode itself, but
what a privilege. It's true. All right, he's probably popping in and out right now.
Here we go.
Willy Wonka with the popcorn. The suspense is killing me. Hope it lasts. There, got a movie reference in.
Yeah, there we go. Bingo.
Bingo.
Someone came up with bingo cards on Twitter. Take a look at the Twitter.
Modcast live stream bingo.
Yeah. Oh, there he is. He's back.
Get him back. Oh, almost.
You guys there?
Wait,
Hello.
take it away,
Hello?
sir.
All right. So this is where I want to talk about the argument that can be made where Arya manifests Sir Amory's death through magical thinking, which is a notion ascribed to by people like Aleister Crowley, sort of a dark magic where one's thoughts, ideas, wishes, actions can influence the course of events in the physical world, often achieved through prayer, rituals, mantras, things that sound familiar to readers of these chapters. There's always some kind of not always, but there's often a satanic element or even extraterrestrial, not magic in I will now pull a Zorse out of this hat, but magic is in 3 monkey paw wishes from a murder genie. And if you want to go down that rabbit hole, it can go as far as you really want to follow it. Did magical thinking on the part of Daenerys allow her dragon eggs to hatch? She hatches them during a funeral pyre that included a ritual sacrifice in the form of Miri Mazdur, while asking, is it so far from madness to wisdom? Is that how Melisandre was able to conjure and birth a shadow baby? Melisandre and Stannis consciously or unconsciously came together to create this monster and therefore willed it into existence. It has real world ramifications. We see Stannis weak and drained after the experience. He coupled with Melisandre and gave an essence of himself in order to manifest his hopes and desires, namely defeating his enemies, strengthening his military positioning, and solidifying his attempt to win the Game of Thrones. His magical thinking, spiritual reality behind Thoros' prayers that bring back Beric time after time. In the hit HBO TV show that these tie-in novels are based upon, Thoros' perspective is fleshed out a bit more explicitly. I knelt beside his cold body and said the old words, not because I believed in them, but he was my friend, and he was dead, and they were the only words I knew. And for the first time in my life, the Lord replied. Beric was brought back because Thoros wanted him back. He was tuned into the frequency through his grief that gave real power to his formerly empty prayers. And we'll get to that scene in a couple more years, maybe. But here now in Harrenhal, Amory Lorch is on Arya's list for the death of Yoren. And the repetition of her kill list, like a prayer, conjured her death angel. Whispering Amory's name to the darkness enough times could have manifested the magical circumstances that brought Jaqen and Vargo along to fulfill the desire to see Amory punished. And punished he is. And despite the execution of his execution, Arya is still satisfied and crossing that name off her list.
Arya still thinks it's righteous, as she says, the bear is black, like Yoren. This is payback for Yoren's death. And yeah, there's that aspect where it's like a manifestation of her deepest desires. But it's being carried out by men who don't give a shit about Yoren's death, about anything he stood for. Some of these men have been just fine carrying out atrocities in the Lannister name. Have things really gotten better? And that same question applies to the big picture politics. On first read, this seems like George taking away from the Starks with one hand and giving unto them with the other. Tyrion will make this explicit in his next chapter when he thinks that the gods have taken Winterfell away from the Starks and given unto them Harrenhal. What a dismal exchange is how he puts it. In truth, it's even worse than Tyrion makes it appear. Roose taking Harrenhal fits Edmure's plan to trap Tywin, but Tywin escapes that trap by barging down the Blackwater with the Tyrells to bring down Stannis at King's Landing. Meanwhile, on reread, we know that Roose begins actively working against the Starks and for the Lannisters after the Battle of Blackwater. That simply would not be possible without a base of operations wherein Roose wields total control over the means of communication. In other words, if Roose does not take Harrenhal and remains in the field, there's a big obstacle in the way of the Red Wedding. Not an insurmountable one, because Tywin can still contact the Freys, and so can Roose. They can form like a telephone game of information. But the point is how much the fall of Harrenhal winds up backfiring on every possible level, and what that says about its place in Arya's story. The only real improvement is the fire inside Arya's heart. Name off her list. And that is very meaningful to her, but only to her. And only for now. By the time we check in with Arya again after the Battle of Blackwater, we will see that things are just as bad, if not worse, inside the walls of Harrenhal now. This castle and the realm it stands in for seems cursed, and there is no way for magic to set it all to rights.
Yeah, I love that, man. Like it just kind of captures the essence of the whole thing. So really well put there. And Jeff touched on it a little bit last week, and it kind of stuck with me. The magic and the curse of Harrenhal, and we concede that it's magical and cursed, right? But just think of the parade of men that have laid claim to it in some form or another, even up to just this point in the story. Tywin Lannister, Janos Slynt, Jeff's good friend, Amory Lorch, Varga Hoat, and Roose Bolton. Some of the worst people in the entire narrative, war criminals left and right, and like you said, just monsters, lurking right under the surface. So it follows that fucked up things will follow these fucked up people through this fucked up cast. It's that refracting that prism, the magic and the curse real, but they go through the prism of humanity or lack thereof when they try to wield or control it. And I think it's a great encapsulation of that.
It truly is. This is definitely feeding into the narrative of the tragedy of the Stark cause, starting from Ned, flowing through Robb Stark. Here in Harrenhal, we get a moment of seeming triumph, which of course gets turned around to this moment of complete tragedy and war crime when we get to the Red Wedding itself. And I think that takes us nicely into our foreshadowing and groundwork portion of this episode.
So this will, of course, not be the last we see of that bear that the Bloody Mummers bring in that eats Amory Lorch. The Bloody Mummers toss Brienne into that bear pit in a storm of swords, and Jaime saves her life at cost of the bears. And I always felt bad for that bear. Obviously, the main takeaway is like relief that Brienne is okay. But like the bear didn't do anything to, deserve that fate. It was just being tormented and tortured onward by the Mummers.
The bear is just following its natural state of things, and the Bloody Mummers are acting against the natural state of humans, right? In killing people in the worst possible way and turning this bear against human beings. And along that same lines, Amory Lorch getting thrown into the bear pit comes back in Jaime's 6th chapter in Storm of Swords, when Jaime jumps down into the bear pit to save Brienne and finds a jawbone with green flesh and crawling with maggots, and uses it in vain to try and ward off the bear. And this jawbone is most likely all that remains of the war criminal Amory Lorch. Again, that kind of, in my mind, so receives a little bit of foreshadowing for what happens with Tywin Lannister, and that Amory Lorch's true self is being revealed here as just crawling with maggots, green flesh, rotting. What this guy is being, the metaphor is being brought to life, so to speak, when we get to Jaime's 6th chapter in A Storm of Swords.
Worms await you, Amory. What we're seeing here. So the iron coin that Arya receives from Jaqen turns out to be pretty important. It will be used in Arya's final A Clash of Kings chapter when she offers it to a guard, drops it, or so it seems, and then slits his throat when he leans down in order to escape Harrenhal. The coin will also seemingly mark her out as a faceless man, and she'll give this coin to Captain Turnicio Terrace, who will assume that Arya is a faceless man and take her to Bravos at the end of A Storm of Swords and the start of A Feast for Crows. So this coin is it's multiple kind of things being set up and foreshadowed here for Arya.
Right, and it kind of speaks also to this whole idea of what the coin actually represents and the saying of the faceless men, because the idea, the phrase "Valor Morgellus" is left as a mystery phrase throughout this chapter. And while George does drop numerous hints in this chapter what the phrase means, he is, for instance, couples men and deaths together in several paragraphs surrounding Arya and Jaqen's use of the phrase. He's actually not going to reveal until Dany's third chapter in The Storm of Swords, when Missandei says the thing and Dany translates it to "all men must die."
Yeah, right on. I also see Roos's leeches as foreshadowing Stannis' leeches, adding another layer of depth and credence to the whole existence of blood magic and the power of royal or highborn blood, as well as seeing groundwork in Arya's continuing string of mentors and father figures that have all something or other to teach her about both death and survival. Ned, Syrio, Yoren, Jaqen, Beric, Thoros, Sandor, and the Kindly Man, and who knows who else she'll run into in her dozens of Winds of Winter chapters.
That's true. That's these beats are going to return kind of darker and more dramatic each time as Arya keeps acquiring mentor figures, and then keep the weight of the loss of the previous ones hangs so heavy on her until she's considering, again, like I was saying earlier, considering just getting rid of all of them and emotional attachment to all of them and just embracing the void at the heart of the House of Black and White. And that's kind of just one pole of her arc, and then presumably we'll get the boomerang back to Winterfell.
Mm-hmm. Can't wait for that.
Heck yeah. So talking more in the theory discussion direction, Jaqen H'ghar changes his face, like I said, and walks away from Arya in this chapter, and that's it for his presence in Arya's storyline to date. But that's not it for him as a character in A Song of Ice and Fire. The reason he changes his face, the reason he bothers to, is because he has other shenanigans to get up to. And he doesn't want anyone presumably drawing the dots. So, what does Jaqen get up to after leaving Harrenhal? He reappears in Old Town, calling himself the Alchemist, manipulating young Pate to his death in the prologue to A Feast for Crows, in order to get his hands on a Citadel skeleton key belonging to the Archmaesters. By the time we see him again, at the very end of that book, he has taken Pate's face and has wormed his way into Marwyn the Mage's inner circle. In A Dance with Dragons, Tyrion inadvertently lets us know what he might be after when he's talking about his dream library for dealing with dragons. He describes the fragmentary, anonymous, blood-soaked tome, sometimes called Blood and Fire and sometimes The Death of Dragons, the only surviving copy of which was supposedly hidden away in a locked vault beneath the Citadel. This could be part of a faceless man plot against Daenerys. The Death of Dragons. They're going to try to take down her dragons. Mm-hmm. Although I wonder whether we really have time for that. Dany has no shortage of enemy and plot beats to go through. Is this potentially on the excised Braavosi plot lines that George referenced? And so it'll just kind of have to peter out? Or maybe Arya is going to be ordered to kill Dany? And kind of another question that goes hand in hand with that is what Jaqen got up to in between Harrenhal and Old Town. Did he just take his time going from one to the other, or did he kill Balon Greyjoy in between? Or was that another faceless man? We know someone in this order. The ghost of Highheart told us so in one of her visions. I dreamt of a man without a face, waiting on a bridge that swayed and swung. On his shoulder perched a drowned crow with seaweed hanging from his wings. Euron officially takes credit for Balon's death in The Forsaken. He's the drowned crow there, and confirms that it was not by his own hand. He might have used the dragon egg he claims to have thrown into the sea in order to pay the Faceless Men, because the Faceless Men would charge a lot for killing a king, as Littlefinger kind of inadvertently tells us in Book 1. Do you have any idea how costly they are? You could hire an army of common sellswords for half the price, and that's for a merchant. I don't dare think what they might ask for a princess. So maybe that ties into the Alchemist's mission in Old Town. Are the Faceless Men anti-dragon? They're trying to use the book The Death of Dragons to kill Dany's dragons? Or do they have a dragon egg on loan from Euron, and they're trying to grow their own?
Yeah, I accept the interpretation that Euron throwing the dragon egg into the sea is him giving his dragon egg to the Faceless Men in exchange for them killing Balon. And it's entirely possible that Jaqen was the Faceless Men who did it, but what I'm clear on is how Jaqen would be in contact with the Faceless Men when Euron is likely in Karth long before Jaqen was in the Black Cells, again posing as Euron Nightwalker. That said, I really like the interpretation that the Faceless Men are attempting to find the Death of the Dragons, Blood and Fire book that will teach them how to kill dragons or how to birth or control them. And of the two interpretations, I tend to favor the latter one as it lines up with them having a dragon egg in the first place. In this, I think there's a parallel with the Children of the Forest and their desperate attempt to defeat the First Men. As was revealed in Season 6 and likely is going to be revealed in the Winds of Winter and some of Bran's chapters, the Children of the Forest decided on an ultimate super weapon to bring about the end of the war with the First Men, namely bringing about and creating the others. That experiment went real fucking bad for the Children of the Forest ultimately, but it helps us understand why the Faceless Men might be interested in bringing about a dragon after the Lord of Ice and Fire hints that the Faceless Men may have been behind the doom of Valyria and the death of the dragons and their riders. And in a way, you can understand the logic behind the Faceless Men wanting to bring about a weapon that would kill the largest number of people. It does tie in with their death cult ideology. That said, I will note that George was once asked whether the Faceless Men had been hired to kill Dany's dragons, and he responded, not yet. So maybe Jaqen is down at the Citadel simply to get a book about killing dragons to be used in an attempt to kill Dany's dragons. And, you know, to kind of think about it a little bit more, I was thinking about this, your idea about Arya being used to kill Dany. And there's this kind of fringe theory that I kind of like, even though it's kind of fringe, and this idea that Arya is learning about all of these languages in Braavos. And so she's learning High Valyrian, she's learning Braavosi, she's learning all the different tongues in Essos. And who also knows lots of tongues and languages and who is sort of the same age as Arya Stark? It's Missandei of Noth. And there's a possibility that Arya might be sent by the Faceless Men to kill Missandei. And that's how Arya gets back to Westeros, as posing as Missandei wearing her face. I mean, it's real fucking fringe, but it's kind of a cool kind of metal theory, so to speak, even though it's completely terrible and tragic. So whatever ends up being the case that George ends up getting Arya back, Arya is coming back. And whatever the direction George has taken Jaqen H'ghar's story, his and the overall Faceless Men's story in The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Springs, it looks to be real different from the one portrayed in the Throne show. And I guess I'm reluctantly excited for that story.
As I said before, the Faceless Men are not particularly satisfying in terms of how they fit into the world building and the overall plot structure of A Song of Ice and Fire. But Jaqen, aka the Alchemist, is this interesting dangling plot thread because he was conceived so much earlier than a lot of the House of Black and White stuff, and because he's just so geographically disconnected from it now. So it seems like he seems due for his own payoff, but I also can't quite imagine what that might be, especially because there's so many other elements that work in Old Town, especially my boy Euron. So I am quite curious to see if he gets kind of just swallowed up in that, as I suspect he might be.
Mm-hmm.
And
anything you want to add, Zach?
Yeah, I think it'd be, interesting if he was like mostly written out of the narrative, but then kind of just slides back in for one or two really important kills and just kind of like ties a couple of threads together with Arya when she gets back to Westeros, and just, I don't know, it just kind of slipping in and out like a little video game assassin or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Oh, yes, Faceless Men, Arya. And as we know, George is writing a lot about Arya in Braavos for The Winds of Winter. So I'm interested. I think the thing I'm interested in the most about in Arya's story in The Winds of Winter is whether it will be explicitly revealed whether the Faceless Men were behind the Doom of Valyria, whether there'll be some more explicit reveals about the Faceless Men, what they're doing and what their plans are for the future. And that's something to be certainly excited for as we get The Winds of Winter next week or the week thereafter.
And some of those reveals might come through Old Town because, whatever Doc is up to might be the core of their plan. So it might not even happen in Arya's POV, which is going to be an interesting kind of fragment effect in that regard.
Yeah, that'd be so cool to have Sammo be the point of view for getting some of those reveals from Jaqen H'ghar. Just slips it in, just a little bit in the form of paid. Oh, I've been reading this book about the Faceless Men. Did you know? Like
with Gilly, exactly. We'll just get those subtle reveals just worked in the same POV. Be perfect.
Cannot wait.
So, thank you so much to everyone. Oh, sorry, I took away your. You're
good, man. You're good. You sounded so natural going into it. Just take us away, brother.
Well, thank you so much to everyone for listening, and thank you so much to everyone for watching us on the stream. And we want to thank you again to Zach for joining us for 2 weeks in a row. You're the best, man. Where can people find you online? I cursed it by taking.
People can find me on Twitter at WolfmanZack _ on Instagram at WolfmanZack. And then once again, if you can find me on Reddit, then you win a prize.
Yeah, I'm still investigating.
Just gonna win that prize.
I'm gonna win that prize. I'm gonna find you, man.
You know,
I'm gonna send
prize.
you a DM. Yeah.
That's the problem.
What? Is there a prize?
It's a weekend prize.
Yeah, it was just an absolute pleasure to have you on for these 2 parts for Arya IX. 2 really great episodes that made all the greater by your presence in them. So, as always, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, SoundCloud, Podbean, Spotify, anywhere and everywhere where you find our podcasts.
You can check out our Patreon at patreon.com/notacastASOIAF. You can follow us on Twitter at notacastASOIAF or shoot us an email at notacastASOIAF@gmail.com. You can find me at PoorQuentin on Twitter or at PoorQuentin.com.
And you can find me at Brendan Beefish on Twitter, Brendan Beefish on Reddit, and my website is warsandpoliticsviceandfire.wordpress.com.
We want to shout out and thank our high lords and ladies on Patreon. Red Relu himself, who has renounced his allegiance to the Squishers. Lady of 1,000 Words, Septon Eastwood of Introvert Isle, Septon Marybald, the Shoeless Sage, Sister Winter, Lady of the Wolfswood, Nessie the Elusive, Warden of the Neck, Defender of the North, and Keeper of Secrets. Sandy the Dragon, Blood of Queen Daenerys and Lady of Jameson. Lady Britt, Bastard Mistress of Harrenhal. Sir Thomas the Raven Knight, Lord of Blackwood. Lady Dillsdale, the Star Spear of Crescent Hill. Sir Way, of course. Matt, Warden of the Sanguine Shore. Lord Mark Cunnington, Heir to Griffin's Roost. Lord Sam Kay, Sir Michael Mertens. Wisdom Benjacut, Alchemist of Setson Quantum, Maid of the Arts of Bool and de Morgan. Tibbs the Great of House Catnapping. Lord J. Manderley, Baker of the Frey Pies. Septon Merriful, Head of Hair. Lady Silverwing, Kaboth the Unfrozen, Lord of the Bricks, and Castle Crimson Light. Sir Keith of House Corbray, Wielder of Lady Forlorn. Lord Andrew, Warden of the Dubai Sands. Ryan Noy, Forger of the Mighty Hammer and Keeper of the King's Anvil. Lord Young of the Ghost Woods. Lady Mirror Reed, Wielder of Dark Sister, Player of Tinfoil. Lady of Rainy Afternoons. Sir Will of the Anarcho-Syndicalist Commune. Lord Clay, and our newest High Lord, Lord DK, former window washer of the Winterfell Glass Gardens. So thank you so much, as always, to our high lords and ladies, and welcome to Lord DK, former window washer of the Winterfell Glass Gardens.
Yeah, I love that title, man. That's a great title, and welcome to the High Lords, and thank you, of course, to all of you High Lords and ladies for supporting us every month on Patreon. So join us next week as drumroll, please. Part 1 of A Clash of Kings, Daenerys 4. Fuck yeah! In which Dany hangs out in the creepy opium den known as the House of the Undying. Dany, got some advice for you. If your friends want you to take drugs, they're not really your friends.
Man, I picked the wrong chapters. That's right up my alley.
You missed it by 1 week, but yeah, don't worry, folks. Just gonna bring the crossed arm, dare mom approach to this chapter. Don't worry, we will keep you safe. But yes, obviously, the House of the Undying is one of the unquestioned peaks of the entire series. What can we say about it? We're gonna find out. There's lots to say, so can't wait for that.
Cannot wait, indeed. So thank you so much for listening or watching. Thank you again for Zach for joining us, and we'll see you guys next week.
Okay, stop recording.
Yep.
Very good. Thanks again, Zach, for coming on. You are the absolute best, and thanks everyone for watching.
Yeah, thanks for having me again, and glad it went a little smoother this time overall, despite the recycling situation.
It's all good.
All good. We're just thrilled to have you, and go through this stuff with you. We know you love this part of the story as much as we do, so 'tis our delight.
Yeah, it was a blast. It's just like I said, it's fun picking it apart with you guys and really seeing the threads that lead to the other threads and how you guys spin off of each other's stuff and watching it all develop. It's really fun. So I appreciate you letting me along for the ride as always.
Yeah, man, it was an absolute pleasure to have you with us and providing your insights and your love for these Arya chapters. And I guess we can reveal now you'll be back to join us for some fun episodes on the Brother Without Banners when we get to them in A Storm of Swords. So we're really looking forward to that a lot.
The best stuff.
Yeah, it's going to be a blast.
We know
you'll love so much fun.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, like I said last week, it's just it's the peak of that kind of grimy fantasy stuff that I like. And real quick, will you just walk me through the saving of this real quick before I accidentally delete it?
Yeah, sure. So go ahead and stop your recording,
Mm-hmm.
and then hit the file button, and then hit export, and then export as an MP3.
Cool.
And then I'll shoot you the link over our top secret DMs that no one can be privy to show the people, all the 80 people who are watching this chat. So yeah. So yeah, we can stick around for a few questions. I don't know, Zach, if you have to bounce or whatnot, if you want to stick around for a little bit, or
Yeah, I'll stick around for that.
okay. Rohane is back. Hi, Rohane. Welcome back. She says, if you guys are doing questions, mine is, how do you feel about the fact that there's a real child out in the world named Hoster?
It's an unfortunate name, I would say.
Yeah.
I mean, you can shorten it to Haas. I don't know if that's better.
At my daughter's school, there's a kid named Arya, but it's not like Arya Stark. It's not spelled like Arya. It's spelled with a different way. So I
feel worse for that.
Right. I'm like, well, every single time, I hear about whenever Livy says, "Oh, Arya's," I'm like, "Arya Stark," and she's, "No, Arya, my friend." I'm like, "Oh, okay," but yeah,
I guess that's okay then.
Yeah, that's much better than that. So yeah, all good stuff. Aaron M asks, my question is, do you guys feel good about the Forsaken Part 4 making me cry at the grocery store? Do you?
I mean, no, we never want to do that ever.
It was an emotional ending to a chapter, right? I mean, the chapter ends with, Damphair stepping outside of his zone of comfort in a way that makes it a really beautiful finish for the chapter, and yeah, it was great. Damon Blackfire asks, have you guys read the Dying Earth books by Jack Vance? Have you read them?
I've read not in a while and not completely, so I would not be the resource to ask on that.
I have not read those books, but I've read George talking about his love for the books and them being a definite inspiration for him. So yeah, and unfortunately, it's not books I've read. What's up? Everything right? Oh no, Emmett's frozen. No.
Oh, did I do that?
He's just got this look on his face. It's really great. It's like staring into the sunset.
We're all
directly into the sunset.
Yeah,
fine.
we're all freezing on each other. So let's bring the baby into
Mrs. Wolfman.
You think you're so
I'm not killing my co-host.
funny.
New co-host.
Oh, look at that child. Beautiful. Hi. How are you?
Who is it?
Hi.
Dada's nerd friends. Where's Emmett? She said. What happened to him? Hey. Did I nuke it? Was that my fault?
No. I think he just needs to refresh. But yeah.
Sure.
Oh, I think he's going to come back here momentarily.
All right.
How old is she now?
She's just past 9 months.
Hello.
So
Hey,
she's got
he's
her
back.
good old sleep regression happening. Hey.
We have a new co-host. The fourth.
We got the best guest ever. Hello.
Almost as good as the kitty cats.
Oh,
Yeah.
even better.
Oh, that's good.
Hi. Oh,
So she can't,
Cheeks.
she
Oh my
can't hear you
God.
guys, but
Yeah.
great.
thanks.
She's in charge.
I'm going to hide behind her while you guys.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Have to ask her opinions about everything now.
Yeah, we got lots of questions that we're gonna have to.
Her opinion is pop, 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 pop.
Oh, look at that smile. Such a big smile. Love that.
Me too.
All right. Oh my God, Bears asks, if Sam, Alaris, and Pate, in quotation marks, escape Old Town, hopefully, will they know Pate is a faceless man? Will it be obvious that Pate is off given his time together in a crisis? So one of the things we actually know is that, so the prologue for A Feast for Crows has Pate, the point of view character, talking about how he hates the name the Pig Boy, and then Sam's final chapter in A Feast for Crows has Pate referring himself as the Pig Boy. I'm Pate, the Pig Boy, which is supposed to be this kind of giveaway that Pate is not actually Pate, that it's actually Jaqen H'ghar. So I think there's going to be several clues that's going to indicate that this guy is not who he seems he is. I'm curious whether he'll be explicitly revealed as a faceless man. Will there be another moment where he takes his face off or puts a new face on? I don't. She agrees. That's good.
She has some very strong interjections to make on this. But yeah, I totally agree, Jeff, that there's going to be several giveaways, and it's probably going to be like some suspense for the reader as we know the truth, but Sam and Sorella only kind of half know and have a feeling that something is off. But yeah, I gotta imagine that's going to be I don't think he's going to stick around with them long term. I imagine he's going to be exposed, and whatever the point of his plot is going to be revealed in Old Town, probably.
Yeah. Do you think he makes that of Old Town alive?
I doubt it. If he does, maybe. I mean, again, I don't think the faceless men. There's much room for them in the larger structure of the plot. Sorella is already another companion for Sam. So I don't think we need another.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Sam has a number of interesting characters. I think I have to imagine that Leo Tyrell is going to make it out of Old Town alive. I mean,
really? You're very optimistic about people making it out of Old Town.
I think everyone's
going to die.
You got to have a good
too, man.
Antagonist for Samuel to be like the character that just like pisses Sam off like the entire time they're trying to make their way out of.
I can see that. That works.
And like he's like bitching and moaning about like, I don't have all this nice food anymore. And Sam's like, dude, I fucking like
the state of my boots. Yeah, no, I can see that being funny.
Do you know what happened to me? Yeah. Ugh.
That's why I wonder if when he sees Euron, he's already kind of gone through his whole like Fist of the First Man thing, and
it's true.
It's just like you wonder like what Euron could do to make him be even more horrified, or just what his reaction there is going to be. It's going to be so fascinating.
That's very true. Will he be more scared, or will he think I've already been through the worst? There's nothing you can throw at me. Maybe he'll find some courage in that. It's true.
Well, I think it'll be good to draw some of those parallels you said. If Euron kind of stands in for that apocalyptic endgame like that, then I think he'll flesh out some of those parallels there.
I bet you're right.
Mm-hmm. Tony 3483 asks, does Arya naming Jaqen really mean he needs to kill himself, or does he make that decision on his own?
Well, I mean, it depends how thoroughly he follows his own rules. As Arya says, when Jaqen draws the knife, she doesn't know if he means it for himself or for her. If he's going to kill himself and follow the rules, or just say, fuck you, child, I'm going to murder you. I mean, that gets back to the ambiguity of what Jaqen's really doing. Like, how seriously is he taking any of this? Is this just a lark, or is this a very serious initiation for him? I can't imagine he's really gonna slit his throat and bleed out in the Harrenhal Godswood because Arya told him to.
Yeah, but he's also like he's really scared when she says it. Like he's got that look like he would. Yeah, so I don't know if it's just like trying to push on her that, or if he's just fucking around. He has fear.
Yeah, it's true. I don't know if that's just to impress the seriousness, but yeah, I mean, like obviously he's dedicated to what he's doing, but what he's doing doesn't really seem kosher anyway. So it's just very difficult to say. It's mysterious by design, I think.
Right, and I think it also leads to that mystery. Like, just doesn't make a lot of sense in some ways. I guess like Jaqen could have walked out at any point in time. That's what it seems like in this chapter. He's like, I could have like rolled out whenever, but it's all good. It's all good stuff. It's something that is something I'm actually really interested about. And of course, George talked about recently, he's writing Samuel chapters for the Winds of Winter now. So or at least one. So hopefully hopefully it's on his mind now. So it's on our minds as well. So we'll see where George takes the story. Let's see here. Good question from Caitlin K. If Roose had discovered Arya's identity, what would he have done?
What do you think about that?
He would have held her.
I think he had such a great point. No one else can hear it except for us. No, I'm kidding.
Well, we have to wait. We can't rush in and make it ourselves.
It's like Roose Bolton. He would obviously keep that secret from the Starks, right? It's like something he would hold in his pocket. You think, or I mean,
let's see what. Let's not jump on Zach's.
That's true. Yeah, I'll
see what he says.
hold back. Yeah, now the baby's face is looking at us. It's very sad.
Right. He's just done with all this.
She's got more hair in the back than I do.
Youth.
Yes. Oh, how are you today, sir? While we're waiting for Zach to come back.
Oh, I'm not bad. Not bad. Yeah, family's in decent shape. Chloe's working hard. Yeah, not too much to report. We're looking at like catering stuff for the wedding, but a lot of it just feels very hypothetical at this point because it's so who knows what shape things will be in by then.
It's gonna be chicken or steak, or is it gonna be seafood? It's got to be seafood. I know it's gonna be seafood.
I think we'll try to have a range of options. We want to have a vegetarian option for people as well.
True.
So we'll see but there's a fantasy aspect of just flicking through pictures of delicious food.
It's great.
So that kind of projection is, it can be mentally like taking a bath for your brain. It's nice.
Well, the thing is that you have to, you have to go to the caterer companies, and the best part is that they'll feed you. Like, oh, let me provide you a menu. So you have to schedule like every night of the week. Like you get dinner taken care of for yourself.
That's not.
I'm just a little
perks, little silver linings. You find those absolutely. I get you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Guilty Undertaker asks if Wyman Manderley is going to be catering your.
Well, yeah, seafood wise, he would be the man to see about that with everything he brings to Winterfell.
Mm-hmm. Oh, looks like Zach is going to have to bail on us because he has to get his kids to bed. So.
All right. Well, many thanks again, sir. We tip the hat to you. We love you and thank you for coming on. Bless your children. And now I can turn the question over to Jeff properly.
Okay. So, yes, thank you to Zach for joining us. It was a lot of fun to have you on for this episode. So, yeah. And we'll see you in this come a storm of swords.
Damn right.
So I think that Roose is going to keep. It really depends. Like, but if it happens in Arya 9, if she reveals herself as Arya Stark, I think that
right on the spot, yeah,
that he's going to send word back to River Run to be like, "I've got your daughter," or something like that, because he's still a Stark guy. If it happens in Arya 10, I think he's definitely going to hold her back as some sort of means of. He's going to hold her back for Ramsay most likely, right? Because the entire plot at the end of A Storm of Swords is to have Jane Poole pose as Arya Stark and marry her to Ramsay. But now if he's got Arya in his clutches, then he's going to marry Ramsay to the actual thing as opposed to the fake version of Arya. What do you think, sir?
Yeah, I think. It makes me wonder what the timing is in terms of the specifics of the deal with Tywin he makes. That completely changes the whole bride for Ramsay deal. If he's got a Stark in the hand, he doesn't need Tywin at all in that regard, and that gives him significant leverage. I think. Yeah, it makes. I mean, his incentives seem clear. I'm wondering what Tywin makes of this alliance now that Roose has a live Stark in the hand. If he's more into it or more kind of intimidated by it, because this gives Roose such a power imbalance. Yeah, I'm curious to see how that plays out after the Red Wedding.
Do you subscribe to the theory that Roose Bolton knew who Arya Stark was at all, or anything like that? Because I know that theory's kind of bounced around a little bit.
Really.
I mean, we could address it as a bad theory for Arya 10.
Sure, but I think that takes the credence is lended to that because of the Tywin Arya relationship that forms in season 2 of the show. I think people kind of transfer a lot of that emotionally, understandably. But no, as weird as Roose is, there's no way he's letting that go.
Yeah,
I can't. I find it very difficult to believe he knew.
I agree. I think it's. I mean, she does kind of say "my lord" instead of "my lord" as a peasant's supposed to. But yeah, I think it's supposed to be a hint to us or a nod to us as readers that she's Arya of House Stark rather than a hint to Roose Bolton.
Yes, I agree.
Because he is not actually perfect in all of his insights and stuff like that.
True.
Lady Dillsdale, one of our High Ladies, asks, what additional big kills will Arya do after the Mercy chapter before leaving the House of Black and White? The Kindly Man? You think he'll...
I suppose that makes sense, yeah. Depending on
she has
how
to kill her mentor figure,
her
literally.
violence, her egress is from the House of Black and White. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this with her list before about whether or not she'll attend to any more people on it, or whether or not she'll try to attend to any more people on it. And then there are the theories that she'll kill Jane Poole and take her face. I don't think it's going to be quite that gruesome. But so yeah, I could see the going up against the faceless men themselves would make sense as a big kind of climactic kill in that regard.
Right, I agree with that. I mean, I like the metal theory that she kills Missandei. I mean,
that has an appeal for sure, because there are like links between, as we've said, between the faceless men and the dragon stuff, between Dany and Braavos. So that would tie all that up into a neat little package, you know?
Yeah. But I think it's definitely the Kindly Man. Who's I'm forgetting now in season 6 of the show, but it's also in A Feast for Crows. It's the Lion Game. Who's she playing the Lion Game with? Remember that character?
Oh, it's the waif. Right.
You think she kills her?
Sure, why not?
She's there.
The faceless men are barely characters, so they may as well.
SKNC asks, speaking of Ramsay, Roose, and Arya, do you think that Littlefinger always planned to pass Jane off as fake Arya once he took her?
If I recall correctly, it was Cersei told Littlefinger to just get rid of her.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
What do you think? Do you think he had an ulterior motive at that point, thinking that far ahead? Or do you think he was just like, flesh, I can make profit from that?
Yeah.
What do you think?
I think it just... This character just happened to be around that she could pose as Arya, and Littlefinger as the kind of jazz musician, as Stephen Ambrose put really, really well, ended up just virtuosing it to have her be retrofit like his plans to subvert the Boltons. So I think one of the fascinating ways that Littlefinger and George are planning to subvert Bolton rule in the North, even without Stannis popping up, was that when Littlefinger shows up with Sansa Stark, he has Sansa who could be there and be like, hey, that's not Arya Stark, that's actually Jane Poole, my friend growing up, and it's an illegitimate marriage based on false premises. And of course Littlefinger would be like, whoa, my God, I just discovered out this brand new information. This is amazing. So I think that's what's may happen. But again, at the same time, Jane Poole has left Winterfell. She is on her way to the Wall with Alysanne Mormont and Tycho Nestoris, and also Justin Massey. So Littlefinger's not going to have that as as something to fall back on. But again, it's one of those things where you wonder whether George was thinking one way of having Littlefinger and Sansa enter the North and be able to subvert Bolton rule, and ends up coming with another way long after the fact as a way of more satisfactorily getting Jane out of the picture and bringing down the Boltons. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I see what you're going there for there. I agree.
Guilty Undertaker asks, if the worst happens and George is unable to complete A Song of Ice and Fire and or Dunk an Egg, would you be in favor of someone else finishing them?
Oof.
No.
Completely finishing, I don't know about that. Compiling, notes that were left to them by George in a way that, here's a forward, here's what we left, here's the basic plot structures, here's some things that might have happened, here's his outlines. A curated role, if we can't get a finished story, I think would be fine. I am leery of someone else picking up the pen and writing in his voice.
Right. I mean, George has such a unique voice, and it's just not easily able to be replicated by another author. I know some folks have said that Daniel Abraham, one of the two writers is behind the Expanse series, who had finished George R. R. Martin's novel he started in the 70s called Hunter's Run, could be a potential candidate to do that. I honestly, just speaking for myself, I'd be fine. Even if I would be fine with the published versions that we have right now. I'd be satisfied with that. And if we get a book of George's intended endings and stuff like that, and stuff that he had written, I'd be also okay with that. But that's not a happy future to contemplate for sure.
No, it isn't. But within that context, I think it would feel strange, like a body double. You know what I mean? It would feel weird.
Agreed. Alan V asks, do you think Ramsay will kill Roose in the books just like in the TV series? The way Roose treats Ramsay seems to me to be a case of the trope, the dog bites back.
Sure. I mean, I alluded to that in this episode. Yeah, I think people made fun of it at the time because the execution seemed very. There was the unfortunate habit in season 6 of Game of Thrones of characters doing something very brazen and saying, "Yeah, can't stop me." Yeah. And just being very kind of simplistic. And that was definitely there with Roose and Ramsay. But yeah, the signs in the books are so strong that like Roose's one blind spot is Ramsay, and that Ramsay is increasingly losing his temper, and that Fat Walda's pregnancy is really setting him off. Like, what is all that pointing to, everybody? I think it's Ramsay killing Roose.
Do you think it occurs on page or off page?
Well, I imagine it's one of those things George is wrestling with, because there's no POVs in Winterfell right now, and it's probably happening soon. So maybe we don't see it, and maybe one of the reasons we don't see it is because, as we saw on the show, it's really hard to pull it off without immediately having the question, why doesn't everyone just rush Ramsay? So if we don't see it happen, we don't have to deal with that question, and then we just get the aftermath of whatever it is. So maybe that's convenient for George,
Killed by his enemies, right? So that's what Ramsay claims as soon as it's like,
right. I mean, maybe, and that's goofy in practice, but to just hear about it, maybe it works better.
It could work because I mean, you have all of those murders that are occurring in Winterfell, right? You have the hooded man who's walking around, and suddenly all of the spearwives, according to Ramsay, have all been killed. So now he's like, the murderer. There's actual murders that are occurring in Winterfell, and that's what got Roose at the end, and that's how he can blame it on. I can see that being a way.
It's like just what Big Walder did to Little Walder, basically, is use those murders to cover up his own advancement. And I could see Roose, Ramsay killing Roose and Walda and blaming it on, a mysterious assassin or the Manderleys or Mance. If Mance has indeed been exposed, as the pink letter suggests, maybe Ramsay frames Mance for the murder of Roose and Walda. I could definitely see that.
Pedro G asks, do the Tyrells use the mad dogs like the Mountain for Tywin? Will we see an example of this in the Winds of Winter? Maybe Randall will count killing the Florence.
What do you think about that? Is that relationship analogous to the Lannister, like kind of unleash the dogs of war kind of mentality?
I think Randall Tarley fits the role of the Mountain, at least the archetypal role, and I think that's what the Tyrells will use. They always have a disavowable asset in the form of Randall Tarley. Although Randall Tarley is a little bit different than Gregor Clegane in that he leads a sizable army and he has a huge command by the end of end of a Storm of Swords, really, when he takes all of half the Tyrell army, not half he takes a certain percentage of the Tyrell army and all of the Stormlanders, and he takes them up to Maidenpool. So he has a big army there. So it's not easy to be like, this guy's he's just acting out of bounds, so to speak, because it's harder to do that. He's got like 20,000 dudes as opposed to the Mountain, who's got like 50, 100 guys at most. Amory Lorch has 100 people here. Tywin's going to blame Amory Lorch for the murders of Elia Martell in A Storm of Swords that we're going to get to. But yeah, I think Randall works the best there. I don't think there's a Gregor figure in the Tyrell army, though.
Gregor is who you sent out to unleash, to just break down law and order. Randall you sent in to restore it in a very kind of brutal, terrible way. But he's, that's what he's the emblem of in Maidenpool and A Feast for Crows, is trying to restore order and justice in the King's Peace in a very top-down, iron fist kind of way. And yeah, he's not, as you said before, Tywin is surrounded by really kind of useless flunkies when it comes to the Westerlands lords, and that's not quite the same in the Reach. Randall is more similar to Stannis in that regard, in that he's a perpetual second in command, military mind bad dog, not a total like animal, like send him reaving and let him bring like how a cat or a dog will like bring an animal back to you and like drop the dead animal at your feet. That's Gregor Clegane. Randall Tarley is a little more advanced than that, even though his base instincts are still very brutal. I think as a commander and politician, there's a little more to him, and I think he's kind of you could see him being to Mace Tyrell the way Stannis is to Robert a lot of the time, feeling just like kind of I do the work and I get none of the credit kind of situation with him. But yeah, there's not like a mindless guy on the Tyrell side in the same ways with Gregor. We just like point at things and go kill. They don't seem to have someone quite like that in their employ. Agreed
there. Take a few more questions. SKNC asks, what exciting Bravosi content are you looking forward to in Arya's Winds chapters? The 36 of them that apparently George is writing.
Sure.
I don't know.
And if the Sea Lord election stuff could be interesting. It's just a total distraction from everything is the problem.
I think the thing I'm most looking forward to, and this is something I think we're going to see in an early Arya chapter after Mercy, is I'm very excited about the possibility. And I'm going to talk about this next week when we get into the House of the Undying. That Arya is going to be running through the city of Braavos and running, doing all sorts of faceless men stuff. And she just she goes to the Sealer's palace and happens by a house with a red door.
Sure,
and it just like blows past, and you're like, whoa! Like
that'd be great. I would love
that's kind of stuff I'm looking forward to for Arya. Arya's Braavosi stuff. A lot of like the faceless men stuff. Again, you're more the Braavos guy than I am. I mean, I've never like gravitated toward the setting the same way I have as like a place like Volantis or King's Landing, even, or Old Town. But Braavos is interesting. It has a lot of interesting aspects to it. It has a great history as being an anti-slavery city. It also speaks to the Renaissance period, which Westeros, it serves as a model for Westeros to progress into after this feudal medieval time. But
I like that aspect of it. I like luxuriating in the kind of the sounds and sights and smells of it, and everyone just kind of scraping around trying to make a quick buck. I like any more of that. That's the stuff I like about Mercy when she describes Braavos as like a crooked city full of crooked alleys and crooked people.
Yes,
I love that stuff. Like White Harbor. I like those just kind of those shady seaside towns where everyone's just kind of sleazy, but also just kind of well-meaning and drunk. I like that atmosphere. The actual plot of Arya's time in Braavos is not especially interesting because it amounts to we're mysterious. Okay, now we're 10% less mysterious. Isn't that intriguing? Okay, I get the thing. Similar problems to Karth, where it's just like opaqueness for opaqueness, the opacity for opacity's sake. And that can get a little old. But, we're reaching the climactic stage of that in Winds, where the faceless men have to actually put up or shut up. Right. So I think it will be more gripping, but also frustrating, because I think we're going to see clearly the paring down of what George wanted the storyline to be. So I think the seams will be visible, I think, in that regard.
I agree with that. Yeah, I think that's part of George's condensing of the plot. It has to return back to Winterfell. It has to return back to Westeros. It's a story of Westeros, so... Braavos, Marine, Volantis, all those places they should be pit stops on the way back for these characters to get back to Westeros, but they could end up being major plot points as George develops them in the Winds of Winter. So that's like what we're going to see. Eric R. asks, you've said before that Mads Mikkelsen would make a great Euron, but he would also make a perfect Roose. No?
I think he would also make a really good Roose. I like, Mads he played Hannibal in the show Hannibal, so that's what makes me think of Euron. Just because the flagrant, horrible torture and stuff. I mean, Roose technically gets up to that, but we don't really see Roose torture people, actually. We just, hear of him vaguely having done that, and he orders other people to do it. But Mads he's very pale and very cultured and refined. So I could also see him working as Roose, and Michael McAlliton was great in the show, and people have lamented that he wasn't quite as weird or creepy or whispery or leechy, but that's just not going to work in like a live action mainstream show that's just like that, giving Roose like those kind of Bond villain ticks. It would make him seem really goofy. So I don't really know if book Roose can work in television without seeming like kind of silly or just too obvious, like, oh, it's the villain. Whereas in the show, Roose is, you don't necessarily realize how fucked up he is until the Red Wedding, because he's played as just kind of like Rob's, harried bookkeeper a lot of the time. You know what I mean? Just keeping track of stuff. So I think within the show's context, I think that works fine. And Book Roose is his own animal.
Yeah, I agree. Rohan puts in that Crispin Glover as Roose Bolton.
All right, see, that's a direction I could actually see working, because, I love Crispin Glover, and he's not obviously intimidating in the same way that Mads Mikkelsen is, so he wouldn't immediately give away what a supervillain he is. You might just think, oh, look at this creepy, weird, affected guy. What's he up to? Or like Brad Dourif is like that as well.
Yes.
Whereas Mads, as soon as he walks on stage, you go, okay, so who's he going to murder?
There's the villain.
Right. Little too obvious. But yeah, Crispin Glover, great choice.
Agreed there. All right, we'll take two more questions. I think we'll call it for a night here. So appreciate you all sticking around and watching for these Q&A sections. It's definitely something that I look forward to every week. Caitlin asks, after taking Winterfell, Theon thinks he would have married Sansa to cement his claim. If she hadn't gone south, do you think he really would have? Well, I think the bigger question is, would Ned have allowed that to happen? Would Ned have married Sansa to Theon? I don't see that happening back in the day. But after taking Winterfell, marrying Sansa just seems kind of one of those kind of like fantasies that Theon is dwelling upon, right? I mean, he's like filled with all these fantastical thoughts about how he's actually going to hold the North, and it just doesn't work for me necessarily.
Yeah, I don't know how long term and realistic Theon is really being there, because he has these half instincts where he kind of knows how he has to be in charge, but he can't reconcile that with him coming as as a position of an outsider, as an Ironborn invader. So if this was a situation in which Sansa had been left behind along with Bran and Rickon, and Theon had married her, I think he would have had a lot of difficulty being accepted in the North, in the same way that Tyrion would have a lot of difficulty as Sansa's husband being accepted in the North. I think if Theon had managed to get a son on Sansa, and Sansa herself did not seem unduly put out by all of this, if she was not visibly crying the way Jane Poole is after being married to Ramsay, I think the North might, in certain circumstances, accept a son of Theon and Sansa. This is a situation in which Theon has not murdered Bran and Rickon, and the Ironborn somehow retain control of the North. In that situation, I think Theon's son by Sansa could wind up with the North. I could see a sliver of a situation, but everything would have to be different about the politics and Theon's character to remotely make that work.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. All right, final question from SKNC, who asks, which characters that you liked on first read do you dislike now? So take us back to 2000, to the Hallycon days of 2005, when you're reading A Song of Ice and Fire. Was there a character that you gravitated to back in the day that you're like, now you're like, not for me?
That doesn't really do it for me. I don't know. I mean, there were characters I just think about differently than I did the first time through, very differently, like Tyrion, for example. I mean, it's hard because, reading it more and getting into, other people who are writing so well about it and talking to them, that enriches most of the characters. There are very few characters that get worse through that process, right? Most of them get more interesting. So it's just my initial ones, characters I fixated on, like Tyrion and Jaime, I've just kind of moved on from. And I don't know if I dislike them now. They're just kind of so much more familiar to me now, and it's difficult to get fresh angles on those ones. But I'm having difficulty naming a character that I actively roll my eyes at now. What do you think?
Quaithe? You weren't going to bring up Quaithe?
Well, I never liked Quaithe, though. She was never a character who was interesting to me. So I don't know if it quite fits that arc.
I think when I first read the books, when I was reading Quaithe, I was like, okay, yeah, the magical mystery figure that's going to guide Dany throughout her journey. And look, her face is in the stars and in the end of A Dance with Dragons. And
that is cool.
That's pretty sweet. And that's pretty awesome. But then when you're actually, as we're doing, getting very granular in terms of the reading through A Clash of Kings and reading through Dany's storyline, you're like, God, she's not really, she's not really doing it for me here as she did in the past. And I was reading recently where she appears to Dany in A Dance with Dragons, and she gives yet another vague warning about all the things that are potentially coming her way. And I just felt frustrated in a way that was different from when I first read that passage, because I was like, ooh, who could these figures possibly be? But now just
a little less mystery there. No, I agree with that.
But we'll see what happens in the Winds of Winter. Maybe Quaithe will make it another appearance, and she'll be awesome and amazing. And
I'm sure she has a role to play, and I get the basic outline of that role. It's just she's so obviously she's just the role. She's just right. George, just copied and pasted. Here's the things I want my witch character to say to Daenerys, and here is the character. And with every other character trope like that in the series, for the most part, George does build on something, give them something quirk. Jojen has some humanity to him. Melisandre is a very interesting character when you start breaking her down. With Quaithe, I think she'll fill her role, but I'll be shocked if there's something, dramatic that will make me care.
Agreed there. All right, guys and gals and folks, thank you so much for watching, and thank you for your patience and everything, and doing a two-parter on Arya. And we're off to the House of the Undying next week, which is
woo.
I think I wrote it, and because I already wrote the synopsis for it. We're a little bit ahead of stuff since we did Arya in two parts. We had most of Arya, part 2 of Arya 9 written. House of the Undying feels in the way like Ned Stark's execution, like the place we're finally making as a podcast. We're now in the zone, so to speak. So we're in the dense part of A Song of Ice and Fire, which speaks to a lot of future events which happen in the story, which I'm very, very excited for.
Me too.
It's going to be a blast. So thank you so much for watching, and we're going to see you all in just 1 week's time. Oh, and of course, if you're still watching, please do check out our Patreon tomorrow to see the new artwork from Stan Rixian, which will be voted upon in a week's time by our Sworn Sword and Higher patrons over patreon.com/Nauticast ASOAF. And you folks who are Sworn Swords and Higher will be receiving a free t-shirt. Thank you so much for your patience on that. And we're very excited to be bringing Mallory's artwork to you all. And now it's going to have Mallory's artwork is going to be on your bodies, which is even better.
Mallory is the absolute best, one of the best artists in the fandom. We're blessed with so many great ones like our patron Vanessa, but Mallory has always done wonderful work, and we're so glad for you to see those designs coming up soon.
It's going to be great. So thank you so much for watching. Thanks for your support. We'll see you guys next week.